definition. It's just a thing you always do. Traditions mean something. Being part of them is how you know you belong.
Then how do I know?
However you may appear, who will you be?
I'll be me.
Transformers Earthspark is, at the time of writing this video, the latest show in the Transformers franchise, and it appears to be Hasbro's biggest gamble with the IP since Transformers Prime. It's got big names for a show like this, with Alan Tudyk as Optimus Prime, Danny Pudi as Bumblebee, Keith David as Grimlock, and the Yarp Narp guy from Hot Fuzz as Megatron.
Yarp.
When Transformers Earthspark first arrived on the scene, it was hailed as being a bold new approach to the story of the Autobot and Decepticon war. Now, almost 3 years later, it's hard to find anybody who doesn't have either a distaste for Earthspark or feels let down by it in some capacity. How did this happen? Pull up a chair, kids, let me tell you a story. I should say up front that I do actually quite enjoy Transformers Earthspark to some extent. It's far from being the worst Transformers show. I'd say it's probably somewhere within the top 15 at least. It's like a high 6, a low 7 out of 10, you know? However, it suffers from being the worst thing anything can possibly be. Mid. It lulls you into a false sense of goodness and then strips it away from you faster than a British cop can say, "Put the blimmin' knife down." It has so much great stuff in it that it makes the really, really bad parts of it even more depressing. This isn't like Rise of the Beast, where you can so easily point fingers to two people behind the scenes having a major clash of visions that cause the movie to turn out really messy. Instead, Transformers Earthspark seems like it was made in earnest by a group of people who all seem to have a collective vision for what they wanted the show to be. It just didn't really come together in the end. Originally, this video was going to be an episode by episode breakdown, but man, this shit is draining. Rise of the Beast was fascinating in how mid it was, but Transformers Earthspark depresses me in how it's able to consistently self-sabotage itself. The thing is, if I really, really hated Earthspark, I wouldn't be making this video. I think dwelling on things that I don't like isn't healthy and it doesn't make for a good video. So just know that all the whining I'm about to do comes from somebody who just wishes this show was better. This isn't going to be a dissection of every aspect of Earthspark or a brutal takedown of every single episode or a body slam of its plot. I just want to talk about the theming and arcs for our main cast in the show's first season, because that's all I really care about. Alongside that, Seasons 2 and 3 of Earthspark feel so disconnected from what it originally set out to do that I just won't be mentioning them at all for the majority of this video unless it's like important to the point I'm making. It'd be really easy to sit here on my ADHD having ass and point out how bad the animation is, or how the story makes no sense now, or how there's an entire story arc where a Quintesson dates a minor for some reason and no one questions it or says anything or points out how weird and uncomfortable it is. I don't want to talk about that stuff because I truly do not care about it. It's a legendary, generational fall-off, and it's clear that the show is currently experiencing major production under duress problems, the likes of which we haven't seen since 1928's Noah's Ark. People died on that movie, you know. I'd actively feel like I'm punching down if I made fun of Earthspark's later half. Like I'd be making fun of a toddler's scribbly little drawing. I'm just here to yap about when the show was in a better place. Not a great place, mind, but a better place. I'm being a little mean right now, but Earthspark genuinely does a lot of stuff really right and really well, and we'll be covering some of that. Don't worry. It's just a shame that the rest of it can't live up to its fullest potential or stick the landing most of the time. But before we walk through the Valley of Death and take a look at our lives and realize there's nothing left, I first want to address a defense for this show that I see all too often. Earthspark supporters love to throw around the argument that Earthspark is entirely exempt from criticism just because it's a cartoon for kids. Usually, I would agree with that to an extent, because I really don't think the majority of cartoons meant for tiny kids should be taken all that seriously. And I think getting really heated and upset over like Teen Titans Go is really strange and scary.
Now I have to do my rant on this. Oh, shit. Sorry if I'm acting angry right now.
But in this case, I think that defense is kind of BS, with a capital B and a capital Z. I'm illiterate, by the way. To me, deflecting criticism of Transformers Earthspark by saying it's just for kids undermines any point you try to make about the quality of the show's storytelling being deep and mature, and furthermore, undermines the show altogether. If I'm not allowed to criticize this show for its writing and handling of a very heavy subject matter, then you're not allowed to praise it for the very same thing. How come it's all made for kids until you start singing its praises and yapping about its supposedly complex themes and character arcs? Transformers Earthspark is a show for kids, but it's also a show for kids that's doing a lot thematically. The first season of Earthspark had a purpose. It had a direction that the second and third season don't have. If Transformers Earthspark hadn't begun with such a vision, such a clear identity of what it wanted to be, I wouldn't be saying all this. If the show had started out in its current form, looking like that one Disney Channel cartoon about the ladybug and probably being written the same way as well, it wouldn't be getting nearly as much flack as it does now. It'd be getting hate, I'm sure of it. But the current outcry of resentment against Earthspark was born entirely from how hard they missed the mark on its second and third seasons compared to the first. I'm not anticipating a show for kids to have amazing writing or to make me have a life-changing epiphany about myself. But this is a cartoon that tries to say so much about really serious adult subjects. It is a show that demands a deeper level of scrutiny on a silver platter based off of the themes it covers and the way it presents itself. You can't just cover themes of racism, immigration, gender, identity, abuse, and war and not expect people to respond in this way. I'm not going to be making a video about why Rescue Bots is propaganda or something dumb like that, because it is a show for literal babies that doesn't take itself too seriously and doesn't act like it's more important than it really is. At most, Rescue Bots is expecting to teach kids to not stick forks in electrical sockets, not how to dismantle the state government. Except for that one episode where Chase the Rescue Bot becomes mayor and he discovers that state funds are allocated to several Ponzi schemes around Griffin Rock. That was a little strange. Part 1. Context. Or a lack thereof. We're just going to jump right in and discuss Earthspark's biggest issue that serves to actively undermine all the important stuff we're going to be talking about later. This is very important because this issue lays the groundwork for almost every other problem in the show. Almost every big idea it tries to cover and fails miserably at stems from this problem. Earthspark, for a large chunk of its runtime, takes its themes and storytelling very seriously. But real quick, I'm going to go over what this show's about before we start covering its problems. I feel like there's going to be some people watching this that haven't seen Earthspark that might need some further context to learn why it's a big, poopy, smelly fart. 15 years after the end of the Autobot-Decepticon War, Optimus Prime and a reformed Megatron are working with a secret organization named Ghost to hunt down any remaining Decepticons left on Earth.
Agent Hitler, FBI.
Meanwhile, two kids named Mo and Robbie, who have just moved into the town of Witwicky, find an ancient artifact called the Ember Stone and accidentally create a new race of Transformers called Terrans. The Terrans are new to this whole living thing, and a lot of Season 1 is them discovering things about their identities while also serving as audience surrogates that teach kids lessons about morality and responsibility and stuff. Meanwhile, Optimus Prime and the rest of the Autobots do a lot of the cool giant robot fighting stuff and actually advance the plot. Now, I do like the Terrans. Some people have called them annoying, but I think they're mostly pretty sweet. One of the biggest weaknesses that makes me buckle under pressure is cute stuff. If something is bad but it has cute stuff in it, I am a lot more forgiving of its issues. Like the movie Chappie. However, I will put these very stinky feelings of mine aside so I can actually yap about what's wrong with the way this show is structured and the way information is delivered to the audience. This was very difficult for me, so I had to have the part of my brain that likes pretty colors and lights shut down using electroconvulsive therapy. I should say up front that the actual story of Earthspark isn't that bad. I quite like the arc of Season 1 and it all adds up in the end. There's no like big gaping plot holes or whatever that take you out of the show or ruin the story. But the biggest issue with Earthspark is the way the story is told. For the majority of this show, we're following the plot from the POV of both the kids and the Terrans, but they're just not let into or clued up on a lot of the story. In fact, some plot points are things they just come across completely by chance. They do not play an active role in the plot because they're too busy having little slice-of-life adventures for the majority of the season, while Optimus Prime and Megatron and Bumblebee and Alita deal with the actual story. I mean, that's bad enough, right? That our main characters aren't actively involved in the plot. It's a simple criticism, but it serves to actively hinder the way vital information is delivered to the audience. We're given very little context for what happened before the show started, which is like kinda important, and relevant, we're told little bits and pieces, shown snippets, but never given a clear picture. Now this can work if you're like Mark Laidlaw or something, like you hide little clues to the wider story and have the audience put the pieces together themselves. But the issue, and the reason this matters, is that so many character arcs and plot points and big ideas are built upon knowing these vital details. There is a severe lack of what actually happened before the show started. There's subtext, and then there's whatever the hell is going on here. There's like little nuggets of information we're fed that tell us about the big picture, and that some of these characters are going through something we're not seeing the full extent of. But since this is told from the perspective of these little rascals, we never get a deeper look into any of this stuff unless Optimus and friends are within their orbit, which they rarely are. I don't even think we know everything by the time season 2 and 3 rolls around, and knowing how the show went, I don't think we're ever gonna find out. There's this one episode in season 1 called War Zone, where Megatron spends an actual non-stop, no joke, 10 minutes where he recounts the show's lore to the kids and the Terrans. Everything he's talking about is kind of like vital information about both his character and the world this show inhabits. It isn't played as a twist or like some shocking new information that has been unearthed. He just spends forever yapping about this really crucial information on how the war ended and why he's good now. The fact that we don't know this about Megatron's character until episode 16 of the 26 episode long first season is crazy. This is what Megatron's entire character and the entire show hinges upon, but we don't know about it until over halfway through the first season because Megatron isn't there a lot of the time. Even worse is the fact that in Warzone, Megatron tells the Terrans about the war and how sad it was and stuff, even though he did a genocide maybe. I'm not sure. This episode is all about Megatron's reform, but the extent of what Megatron and by extension the Decepticons did is never really elaborated on. And what really convinced him to change his tune isn't either. The Decepticons did really bad things, so much so that Megatron turned his back on them and a lot of humans very validly hate all Transformers. But it feels like Megatron is just let off scot-free without as much as a slap on the wrist for leading the army that invaded this helpless planet. Please put a pin in this. It's a surprise for later. So why is it that this really crucial detail about one of the show's main characters just isn't told to us? Again, it's because Megatron does not hang around the Terrans or the kids very much. Even when he does, it's usually for a big fight or something, where he doesn't have time to tell them about all the really important lore. I was actually so baffled about how little we're told about Megatron that I actually started reading the show's production bible and a bunch of these books meant for reading ages 5 to 9 to see if there was any sort of indication from the get-go as to what Megatron actually did. Guess what? There isn't. There's just a bunch of extra lore about how Megatron became friends with the kid's mom.
When Megatron met Lieutenant Dorothy Malto on a battlefield, he realized that she cared more about his Decepticon soldiers than he did, and that she was braver than him too. For the first time in his life, Megatron felt ashamed for all the destruction he had caused. Before Megatron met Lieutenant Dorothy Malto in combat, he never fully understood the meaning of courage.
So how the hell did Megatron go from "that's interesting that a human cares more about my soldiers than I do" to him defecting and turning his back on all of them? Did he try ending the war on his own terms? Or was defecting his only choice? Are you telling me not a single member of Megatron's huge loyal as hell army was willing to follow their leader and defect alongside him? Were they loyal to Megatron or the Decepticon cause? What is the Decepticon cause anyway? How quickly did it take for Megatron's change of heart to occur? Later on, Megatron says that all it took for Optimus Prime to finally trust him was scanning an Earth alt mode.
If you and Optimus were enemies, how'd you get him to trust you?
By scanning an Earth vehicle.
Why is that? Can you elaborate, please? I guess you could infer from what we know in other continuities that Optimus knew Megatron so well that scanning an Earth alt mode must have been like the biggest deal ever for him. But we're not talking about other continuities, we're talking about Earthshot. In shows like Animated and Prime and Beast Wars, we're told as much as we need to know in order to understand the world these characters inhabit. Like in Animated, we're told directly about the war that happened just before the show started, or at the very least, we're presented with enough information that we can infer a character's history with some categoricalness, is that a word? In the very first episode, we're given a little recap of general Transformers lore from the kid's dad, who's a Transformers historian. He's like Chris McFeely, but way cooler, because he has a suit covered in bumblebees, which I'm pretty sure Chris McFeely has never worn.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh shit, you're still here? It's weird that we have a character who can tell us these things about the world the show takes place in, but just doesn't. It's like the show forgets that they actually do have somebody who can recite a TF Wiki article from memory whenever the plot needs him to. I think this aspect of Alex's character, that's the dad's name by the way, only comes up like once or twice after this. It's really strange that they didn't utilize him when they really should have.
You mean The gift of Glitters Prime?
Anyway, throughout Earthspark, Ghost, the organization helping the Transformers, does a lot of really shady shit to the Decepticons they have imprisoned. Very early on, we're given a little hint that something might be up, and the way it's presented is like meant to be kind of foreboding and immediately make you think Optimus Prime is up to something.
I'm trusting you with something not on the tour.
Are we still inside Ghost?
We make compromises to protect those we care about. I am not proud of this, but I know no better option to keep your planet safe.
In the moment, this is a good little scene that raises some interesting questions for the show going forward. But in retrospect, when Megatron tells the kids what really happened on the last day of the war, it makes you realize that everything Ghost has been telling the kids, and by extension the audience, should not be trusted. And that's fun, because it starts to make you question what has and hasn't been the truth. The fact that we can't even trust what Optimus Prime says anymore is such a cool conflict for the viewer. When Alex starts telling the kids about the end of the war, it's told from a biased point of view that downplays Megatron's hand in it. Does Alex know the truth about what happened? Or is this the story that was told to the public to make Megatron's heroic heel turn seem less important? It's such an interesting angle to this show.
There is more to this than meets the eye.
But the thing is, we are given so little information that does not come from Ghost that as an audience, we just do not know anything about any of the legacy characters or the world they inhabit. It's crazy that this one creative choice to separate our main cast from the characters who actively move the plot forward creates a Pizza Hut effect that serves to hinder almost every single aspect of the show. We'll get into a couple more examples later, but broadly speaking, all of this just makes the majority of the more serious topics Earthspark tries to present to impressionable children seem either really black and white or easy to solve, when a lot of them are neither of those things. It's weird because Earthspark starts off like a normal kids show. Its first batch of 10 episodes are slice of life fare before it starts handling very heavy subject matters. Obviously this makes sense pacing wise. For a show like this, it's good to start things off kind of light before you start talking about genocide. But when the show starts talking about all that stuff, you start to realize how little you actually know about this world. And then you start remembering like things that were said as jokes but have now been recontextualized as being really nasty now that the show is actually trying to say something. Like in episode 3, Bumblebee calls up Megatron because he wants advice on how to be a teacher to the Terrans, and Megatron gives him some really bad advice that is obviously meant to be taken as a joke by the viewer.
When I commanded legions of Decepticons, my strategy was always intimidation. My signature move was the Turbo Twister, where I...
But later on in the show, when we get to the whole Starscream thing and we realize how much he and the other Decepticons suffered under Megatron's rule, that joke is like kind of weird now. This, again, is a direct result of the dirty-ass grimy window with which we are seeing this story unfold. A lot of this show's problems going forward are a direct result of the choice to focus on this family's silly little mishaps, and I felt it was important to establish that right at the start so that I wouldn't have to keep repeating myself later on when I talk about some of the craziest stuff this show does. This whole section is just to set up my dogpiling on the rest of this messy-ass show, but I hear you. You're probably wondering, but PaperPlane, so what if the legacy characters in the world itself aren't established or developed? What about the main characters, the Terrans? I am glad you asked, you attentive little freak. I'll tell you all about them and then we'll have a break, okay? See, according to my analytics, a lot of you are still pretty young, which means that under child labor laws, you legally require a break from my yapping every 4 hours. I haven't actually been yapping for 4 hours, but it probably feels like it already, so it adds up. So our two main kid characters, Robbie and Mo, get 2 new Terran siblings named Twitch and Thrash. 9 episodes in, they get 3 more siblings named Jawbreaker, Nightshade, and Hashtag. Hashtag's name caused a real stir when she was revealed. I don't know if you guys were around for that. People were pissed. But really, I don't think it's any more ridiculous than something like Browning, or Big Daddy, or Laser Cog. So real quick, I'm gonna rank the Terrans worst to best just because I feel like it. Okay? Number 5. Thrash. I hate this guy so much. This is like YouTube cartoon reviewer baby slop tantrum levels of me disliking a character from a show meant for kids.
I get pissed off.
He's annoying, he never shuts up, his attempts to be cool are grating, and I hate his stupid nose. Get this guy out of my face. Number 4, Jawbreaker. I like him, I just think he's a little one note, but I do really like the one note that they give him, but we'll get to that later. He doesn't have a lot going on outside of just being sweet and gentle, but I'm a sucker for those kind of characters, so he gets a pass. Number 3, Hashtag. Apparently Hashtag isn't that popular, but I like her. I think out of the 5, she definitely has the weakest characterization, and she doesn't have many big episodes dedicated to her like the rest of them do, but I don't know, she's fun. I like her design, I like her voice, I think her personality is sweet. She's cool. At TFN, somebody gifted me a tiny little hashtag and that made me smile. Thank you, stranger. Number 2, Nightshade. I think Nightshade is pretty cool. Even if it's exhausting to have a character whose whole thing is that they're bubbly and optimistic amongst an entire family that is also bubbly and optimistic, just to a lesser extent. I also really dig Nightshade's design too, especially when they do that thing where they mask up and they look like a superhero. It's neat. I also like their little arc, even if it's kind of messy and abrupt. But again, we'll get to that later. Number 1, Twitch. I really like Twitch. She's my favorite. And I think even when Earthspark falls off in its later seasons, she remains a very consistently fun and nice presence in this show. And I enjoy her character arc where she grows into the de facto leader of the group. Also, her dynamic with Megatron is a lot of fun, and it's really cute. Again, cute shit is my weakness, and it's ruining my ability to think about this show critically. So I like them all well enough, minus that dweeb that turns into a stupid ass bike, right? It's just, I think like as individuals, not a lot of them have a strong enough character to carry the show. Even a couple of the ones I really like. Even worse, when they're all together, they don't really have any kind of team dynamic that makes them fun to watch as a group. They all just sort of work together. I can't really explain what I mean by that, you just kind of have to see it for yourself. But it feels like when the Terrans are all working together, they're not really a team of siblings, they're more like co-workers. They're a family unit, to the point where they talk about family a lot. They talk about family enough times to make Vin Diesel blush.
This is our special family time.
I guess I've been worrying about my family.
They're family now.
Family.
Family.
Family. Family.
Family.
Family, family.
Family. Family.
Family.
Family.
Family. Family.
Family.
Family. Family.
Family.
Here's the thing about family.
Family. Family.
Family.
Family.
Family.
Family. Family. Family.
Family.
Family.
Family. Family.
Family. Family.
Family.
Family.
Family?
Family. 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 Family.
Family.
Family.
Family.
Family.
Family.
Family. Family.
You're interrupting a very wholesome family moment.
It feels like they're actively having to remind their audience of children the relationships these characters have to one another, which might be how writing for kids TV works, I don't know. But I think having them act so tight and friendly to each other doesn't allow for that one really important thing that stories need to have in order to actually be interesting. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's called conflict. I'm not saying the Terrans have to be fighting all the time and constantly at each other's throats in every episode, but it really feels like all of them just kind of get along way too well to allow any interesting team dynamics to occur. There's very rarely a difference of opinion between them that lasts for the entire duration of an episode. Like, don't get me wrong, it's really cute to see a show where a family just kind of gets along and adores each other, but like I said earlier, once the show starts taking itself way more seriously, you're just kind of waiting for the main characters to be tested in this way. That's how this shit works. You plant conflicting feelings and emotions and personalities into the group to allow drama to happen. Like, I don't know if you guys have families or not, but families bicker all the time over differing opinions and views on the stupidest things. In Transformers Prime, I would say there is a solid dynamic to the team and the way they interact with each other. Like, they all get along, but their personalities clash a lot of the time, and that allows for like things to happen between them. At the end of the day, they all care for each other, but they're also their own characters with their own ideas and traits that can very easily clash with one another and cause tension. I know it's not exactly the same thing, but it's Transformers, and I'm assuming a lot of you know about this already, so this might sound kind of toxic, but the team in Earthspark just get along way too well to be interesting sometimes. There's times where they bicker and fight, but it's so short-lived. The plot is almost never driven by these conflicts, and having a show where everybody just kind of gets along gets boring really fast. Now, I said almost just a second ago because there's like 2 times in the whole show where the siblings have a falling out that isn't instantly resolved. The first time is in this one episode early on where Robbie and Mo are arguing the whole episode and then they learn to work together by the end. And the other time is a little later on when Mo realizes her life has been ruined by meeting the Transformers, and it makes Thrash really sad. I swear to God, these are the only instances of our main cast having a conflict with one another that lasts longer than one act. On top of that, once everybody comes together, it's like they all just stop being people. It don't feel like any of the Terrans have any motivation for themselves is what I'm saying. Any goals they do have are not their own. They're shared by the group. They just stop being individuals, and they instead become a collective whole, to the point where I just straight up cannot tell you much about a few of them. Like Jawbreaker, I couldn't tell you what he likes or enjoys outside of wrestling, which is mentioned like twice. I guess he likes making people happy, does that count?
Sorry, Thrash. You need a hug? Mom says love heals all wounds.
Alan, it's a robot. We don't need it.
to feel.
I would argue Earthspark's main theme is identity. What makes you, you? How do your beliefs shape you as a person? I think Earthspark's attempts to enrich the main characters with a deeper emotional core that ties into that theme of identity is a mixed bag. Some are handled quite well and some are not, but again, once more, we'll get to that later. I just think overall they aren't too great as a team. And even worse, because of the way this story is told, I don't think the Terrans overall have any kind of identity. I actually really struggled to articulate this point, so bear with me. I'm sorry. I'm fallible. So the Terrans are like a new species, right? They say it a bunch of times. They're not Cybertronian and they're not human. They're a combo of the two.
What are you?
Transformers? We think.
Not Cybertrona Cybertroni, a new species, entirely from this planet.
You're a Cybertronian. No Autobot I know. Decepticon?
Neither. I'm a Terran.
The new beings Optimus told us about.
So what are they? And I don't mean physically. I mean, what is a Terran? They don't learn enough about human culture to really fit in. And like physically they can't because they're giant robots. I feel like that's an important distinction. But also because of the way information is delivered to them by the narrative, what they learn about Cybertron is so limited that they don't really connect to any of the Cybertronians except for a very surface level student-mentor relationship with some of them. The Terrans end up being defined by their relationship with each other, which in the end is just a very basic sibling dynamic. They never come to an understanding of their place in a larger world and make their own path, which is like the whole point. They remain trapped in this limbo space where they're just a new thing. They get their own epic Terran emblem by the end of the season, but they haven't really earned it. What do they stand for? Being nice? Isn't that what the Autobots stand for? Like there's this one episode called Traditions, where Twitch is sad because she feels like she doesn't fit in with anybody for the reasons we just went over. She meets Wheeljack, who tries to give her some kind of answer to this issue, but instead provides an arbitrary, paradoxical non-solution that would take any normal person back to square one in this line of thinking.
Am I a Cybertronian, a Malto, a drone? All of them? None? I don't even have a tradition.
Why do you want one?
So I know I'm part of something, not different and alone.
You have a family that loves you. Here's the thing about family. You can always find new traditions with them.
That's true, Wheeljack. You can find traditions in your found family, but the issue is that Twitch wants her own traditions and culture, but the fact she's a new species with no history gives her nothing. Like Sis literally just spawned in. Does borrowing a tradition equate to having culture? What are you, British? So they don't connect to their Cybertronian heritage or their human heritage. So what are they really? You could say, well, they're gonna forge their own destiny and carve their own way forward. I feel you, but what is that path? Who are these characters? If this is all about the Terrans creating an identity for themselves, what is that identity? What have they become? Are they meant to forge a new path ahead for the future of Cybertron? Because they're not really doing that either.
Who am I? What am I?
I don't mind the Terrans being the protagonists, and I'm not upset that we're not focusing on Optimus and Bumblebee for the millionth time. You can totally make a story where we're focusing on a bunch of nobodies on their own adventure, that's fine. But the unfortunate reality is that the Terrans are just not that interesting once you get to know them. The group dynamic they have gets stale fast, and the plot that we're actively kept away from and the backstory we're not told is just way more interesting than anything the Terrans have going on. I like at least 4 of the Terrans, right? But just liking a character isn't enough. You have to do something with them. I think, again, when the show starts and it's a regular slice of life affair, it's fine, it works. But the moment they begin introducing these ideas that the Terrans and the world they inhabit are more complex than your typical Saturday morning cartoon, all of a sudden, you're just waiting for the show to actually explore what anything means to anybody. It would be disingenuous of me to suggest the show never explores anything the characters are feeling at all, because it does, to varying levels of success. But one more time, once again, we'll get to that later. A lot of the attempts this show makes at exploring our protagonists on a deeper level usually fall flat. Rather than letting the characters' inner conflicts evolve through character-driven moments, the show often relies on simple reassurances. Because giving things depth is hard. This approach to writing the show doesn't just affect the characters, it directly shapes the kind of emotional lessons the audience is being handed. Constant affirmations simplify complex feelings that the target audience for Earthspark are gonna be feeling at this point in their lives. Just like the Terrans, kids and teenagers have to wrestle with their own need for validation in the hunt for identity, right? Like, when I was a teenager, I started wearing a balaclava I found in my dad's closet to school, and the head of my house had to give me a lecture on why concealing your face and entering a school was a bad idea. I think the premise of Earthspark is a really good idea to help kids through their own identity crises, but by giving the characters all this comfort, I feel like the show kind of says that if you're loved, everything will be okay. I think that message is fine enough on its own, but really, I feel the message for this show should be that belonging is something you create, not something that you should rely on others for. Not everyone has such loving parents and friends to fall back on, and a hug doesn't stop insecurities and doubts lingering inside. Once more, because of the way this story is told, I just don't think that the Terrans find any sort of closure or meaningfully connect to anybody in a way that would help them find their way forward as a new species. And because the Terrans are each constantly reassured of themselves and their belonging, they don't really experience any long-lasting conflict, which is kind of crazy for a show that's taking itself as seriously as Earthspark does. Like I said, on an individual level, I think some of the Terrans are able to explore their identities to allow them to grow in a way that the rest of the family don't see coming. But there are so few moments where these characters have to choose their own paths, their own desires for who they want to be. Because identity isn't about being told who you are, it's about choosing who you want to be. I'm sorry if this is a lot to take in, but guess what? It's only gonna get more difficult from here. We have left the very tippy top of the iceberg, and now we're taking a teeny tiny imploding submarine down to see the depths of this monster. But first, I did promise you guys a break, didn't I? Don't worry. I never forget. I can remember anything, especially the look on my dentist's face when I misunderstood what he meant by open wide. Part 2. Break time. So before we go too far into the depths of planet Yapatron, I want to go over stuff I really like about Earthspark to balance out all the nasty things I'm about to say. I should say as well, every single point I make here that isn't highly specific should end with in the first season. A lot of these positives go out the window by the time we reach seasons 2 and 3, so unless I say otherwise, remember I am just talking about these episodes, okay? Don't you forget. If you do, I'll kill you. I mean it, this isn't a joke, like I'll actually get you. Despite everything I just said in the first part of this video, I think the way Earthspark conveys its main theme of identity through the lens of Transformers and their alt modes is really interesting. Even if it doesn't fully come together all the time, I think it's commendable that they took this big swing. The way Earthspark contextualizes what alt modes mean to these characters is a very welcome and smart change that's able to take the franchise to new places. We'll talk about this in depth a little later when we get to Nightshade, but at the moment, I will say that when the pieces fall into place and this identity motif works, I think it becomes my favorite thing about Earthspark. It's cool. I like it. The animation, especially in the first 10 or so episodes, is really, really beautiful at times. The movement is often very fluid and satisfying, the lighting is fantastic, and the action scenes are really good. Like, some are actually incredible. There's this one fight scene in episode 9 that gets circle jerked a lot, but I mean, is pretty great. I can see why people are willing to open up their legs for it. You see, a good fight scene is like being raw dogged. It's hard, rough, and leaves you wanting more. And this fight does just that. It feels aggressive and violent, they utilize transformation in a cool way, and I wish every other action scene in Transformers could match this level of quality. There's all these crazy stylistic choices in Earthspark's direction which are like so inspired. My favorite is in episode 10, during this scene where Twitch realizes that she has to step up and become a leader in the heat of this big battle. She faces the battlefield, and the light from the explosions outside illuminate the silhouettes of everybody she's fighting for against the wall. It's really fucking rad. The character designs are mostly pretty great. Apparently that's controversial to say, but I do kind of get why. The designs in this show that are really good are like some of the best designs in this whole franchise, while the bad designs are low-key some of the absolute worst of all time. I can't really explain what I mean by this, but Optimus Prime's weird cheekboned face reminds me of Thomas the Tank Engine, and not in a good way. Like, keep the mask on, bro. Pretend it's 2020, my man. Put it back on. But there's a ton of characters I absolutely love the look of. Tarantulas, Nightshade, Soundwave, Frenzy, Bumblebee, Alita 1, Skywarp, and Novastorm, Hashtag, and Twitch are my favorites. I would gladly buy model kits of these guys when Earthspark gets its nostalgic renaissance in like 15 years. I said that I like most of the new cast, minus that stupid ass bike, but I also like a lot of what they do with the legacy cast as well. Bumblebee being a tired weirdo uncle is a fun twist on the character, and even though there's that big gaping issue with Megatron's backstory I mentioned earlier, I do like him a lot as well. He has a really cute little dynamic with Twitch, it's nice. I also think that while she doesn't have a lot to do in the show, it's really cool that we get to see Alita 1 in a Transformers cartoon for the first time in a long while if you're like me and you prefer to forget the War for Cybertron trilogy ever happened.
Affirmative.
The voice acting is pretty good. Like, not Oscar-worthy or anything, but everybody's doing pretty well with the material they're being given. One of the only characters that I don't think is a voice that entirely suits him is Alan Tudyk as Optimus Prime. And that's not to say Alan Tudyk is a bad actor, I really like him in pretty much everything I've seen him in. I just think he might have been horribly miscast in this role as Optimus Prime.
Fortunately, I always prepare for the worst.
Maybe he should go back to playing crazy humans in the live-action Transformers movies, I don't know.
Can my child smoke in here?
But when I heard Keith David was voicing Grimlock in this show, I was really excited. I love Keith David in everything I've seen him in. Like Spawn and Halo and The Princess and the Frog, where he does the whole "Are you ready?" thing. I don't talk about Grimlock a lot on this channel, but I've always loved him. I'd even go as far to say I don't think there's ever been a bad Grimlock. Okay, never mind, I'm sorry.
I'm fine, see? And I'm busy getting to know the young ones.
I don't know if it's just the voice direction, but the performance is really muted and restrained in a way that doesn't feel like a complete utilization of Keith David's range. Like, I know they're probably going for a more grizzled and older Grimlock. I just wish we got to hear some more Keith David-isms. Like, why would you get him at all if you're not gonna use him, you know? Star power? Do 7-year-olds know who Keith David is? Who are you trying to appeal to with all these big names anyway? Me? It ain't working, sis. Anyway, outside of those two, yeah, the voice acting's really solid. The child actors are consistently pretty great. Danny Pudi's a good Bumblebee. Steve Bloom is back as Starscream, which made me audibly freak out the first time I heard him speak. And Cissy Jones as Alita 1 reminds me a lot of Scarlett Johansson in Transformers 1, which is always a good thing. I love being reminded of that movie. I can close my eyes and imagine we got the sequel we all wanted for maximum cope.
What?
I think Earthspark can be pretty funny. There's a lot of jokes and running gags I really like. The humor never felt too obnoxious to me or like minion humor, if you know what I mean. Like, it has stinkers, yeah, but I think the majority of the jokes land and I was giggling and kicking my feet throughout. That's always a plus. This is gonna sound crazy, but I genuinely think the human dynamics and drama are some of the best material in Earthspark. And I don't mean the main two kids, I mean the majority of the supporting human cast are fun. And it made me pretty happy to see that this agent guy wasn't just a throwaway character when he reappeared later down the line. I also really enjoyed how the parents just kinda unconditionally love each other with no caveats or anything. They're supporting characters, so they get a pass to do that. Lastly, I think a lot of the representation in this show is handled in a very tasteful way. I do think some of it is a little iffy, but we'll get to that in about 20 minutes. Our main characters are black and Filipino. We got a non-binary owl, an autistic guy, a disabled lady, an ugly guy, and 2 lesbians. I just think that's really neat, so that gets a big thumbs up from me. Before we wrap this up, I think I gotta reiterate what I said near the start. I do like a large majority of Earthspark, or at least its first season. It's like 60% goodness, 20% kinda boring and forgettable, and 25% oh my god, what were they thinking?
That's 105%.
I don't think it ever gets particularly unwatchable or anything. It's just that its bad moments are actually catastrophic. And it just so happens that the worst moments and scenes in Earthspark are almost all attempts at trying to teach a lesson. So that's what the rest of this video is gonna be about. We're gonna go over some of the themes of Transformers Earthspark, particularly the ones that mean the most to me. So that means break time's over, recess is up, get back in the classroom in time for your Transformers lessons or you're being sent to the goddamn chokey. Part 3. Theming in disguise. When Earthspark came out, I saw people saying the show was important because of the themes it tackled, which I get. A mainstream cartoon attempting to address some of the things this show does is crazy. And I mean the good kind of crazy. It's a big gamble, but if you don't do anything with those themes or commit to them, what have you made? Something performative? Just having themes on their own doesn't make a good story. You have to do something with them. Earthspark, on occasion, explores a theme in a way that is effective and would potentially resonate with the show's target demographic. But most of the time, the show explores a theme or subject matter in either the most surface-level way imaginable or a way that is really questionable and strange. What we're getting into now is the main course, and it's a rhubarb salad, so it sucks. Earthspark can't commit to a lot of its ideas, and it just doesn't have much to say about anything at all. Whenever it does say something, it's either undone completely or ignored by the rest of the show. The Terrans and the humans are always portrayed as being morally in the right regarding the more serious topics the show seems to tackle. Whenever a character has a view that goes against the grain, they are quickly punished and looked down upon, and they quickly change their tune so the plot can resume. Now, sometimes subtext subtext can be kinda dubious with shows for kids. Like, just as an example, sometimes I see people say that Bumblebee in Transformers Animated has ADHD, which I guess is like a valid reading if that's what you took away from the show. I don't think there's anything wrong with reading animated in that way, but I don't think it's helpful to act like that's what the writers were actually going for in the first place. Because, and I mean no offense when I say this, some people read way too deep into some cartoons, which is ironic coming from me, but a lot of what Earthspark tries to say is so clear and in your face. Everything I'm about to talk about are themes that the writers themselves have confirmed to be what they intended to cover, or themes that I feel fairly confident in saying was the intention behind the story. I should say, before we begin, most of these themes are kinda very serious, very political, very touchy. Don't worry though. We'll start off with something gentle and light and simple to understand to ease you in, okay? Okay, let's begin. Number 1. Racism. In the season 1 two-parter, Home, the kids all go to the big city of Philadelphia for a night on the town.
Would you look at that? Philadelphia!
There are 2 big ideas this episode presents, but for now, I'm only gonna tackle one of them, that being Transformers racism. While in the city, Robbie meets up with an old chud friend of his named Stevie, who right off the bat begins exhibiting some pretty anti-Transformer sentiments.
The Transformers ain't like other ones I've read about.
They're not my Transformers.
Oh, I didn't mean it like that.
Good, because they're my family.
But like, not human. They aren't us.
To make matters worse, the Terrans discover racist graffiti in the skate park they're playing in. And honestly, this interaction between Stevie and the Terrans is pretty okay.
Don't let it get under your skin. Whoever wrote that trash probably meant Decepticons, so it's not like it's even about you.
But it doesn't say Decepticons, it says Transformers.
Decepticons, Autobots, Terrans, we're all Cybertronian people.
Whoa, don't freak out.
We're not freaking out, this just isn't okay.
Yeah, well, my dad says invading the Earth wasn't okay either.
Stevie! You know that's wrong!
Relax, Robbie. You know I'm not like that.
The way he tries to invalidate their feelings and brush off the intent behind the message feels real. It feels like how someone who shares these views would try to justify them to the faces of the people they're disrespecting. Hashtag in particular gets pretty torn up over this whole ordeal, becoming more and more distraught and fearful of humans as the episode progresses. Eventually, Hashtag is forced to confront these fears head on as Mandroid, that's the main human bad guy by the way, I've completely forgotten to mention them up until this point, as Mandroid gets inside her head and tortures her with visions of humans telling her to go home. It becomes increasingly apparent as this thread unravels that Hashtag's fears aren't based around how could people hate me for arbitrary reasons, and instead revolve around I'm not going to have a home anymore. I will never fit in. As a pasty white boy, I'm not claiming to be an expert on racism or anything, but I do believe this is a very real fear that people that are victims of racism experience. So far, this is still pretty decent. It's a little on the nose, yes, but it's a pretty good setup for some pretty heavy questions. You're doing pretty good, Earthspark. You get a little star and a little kissy on the cheek. You're just missing the one thing that would make your argument have, like, drama. We never get a clear idea of why the humans feel this way about the robots. Now, obviously, and this might be controversial, but racism is quite bad. I'm not saying we need to sympathize with the humans discriminating against the robots, but understanding where these biases come from is how you combat them in the first place. We get a very vague explanation of why this kid, and by extension the rest of humanity, feels this way about the Transformers. If anything, addressing this at all just raises all sorts of ethical and moral questions about the world the show inhabits. Now, there's probably a wider discussion to be had about the entire fantasy racism trope, and how when it's done poorly, it can trivialize this really bad thing that happens in the real world. In a little place I don't like living in called reality, the human race is not divided into entirely separate genetic categories. We all bleed the same color. We're all the same on the inside. Racism, at its core, imposes exaggerated divisions based solely on superficial traits like skin color. But in fantasy and sci-fi settings, there is a big difference between humans and elves and Argonians and Zora and Geth and Zygons and Hutts and Vortigons and Cybertronians. It's a fine line to ride, and it's really easy to accidentally trivialize racism in this way if you're writing a story like this. Just using a recent example, the new Superman movie features is a similar sort of setup, where an alien has the ability to pose a threat to all of humanity and people are rightfully scared of him. But the difference is that Superman has never attacked humans. He's never hurt an innocent person. The fear that humans feel comes from the possibility of what he could do with his powers, not what he's already done. It's about suspicion and fear projected onto someone who hasn't actually harmed anybody. The prejudice that Superman faces in the movie is based on assumptions and irrational fears. But in Earthspark, I'm pretty sure most humans don't hate Transformers for a superficial reason. They literally descended from the sky one day and blew shit up. People died. One of the main humans in the show lost a leg because of their outer space beef. They're giant. They could kill a human so easily. I'd be scared too. In the context of the show, the Transformers war ended 15 years ago. To a lot of people, that would still be a sore wound. It'd be fresh in their minds. The worry that this alien race could suddenly blow everything up and murder everybody is not unfounded at all. I can totally see why somebody would be scared to be around the robots. This just makes the Terrans and the kids seem really ignorant to anything in this world. Their mom is a soldier and a victim of the war, and their dad is a historian who specializes in Transformers. Do either of them have anything to say about this? It feels like the kids have been told about the Transformers war through some kind of rose-tinted lens fed to them by their parents that downplays the severity of what actually happened. I know it's kind of deep for a kids show, but if you've already gone this far, this would be a perfect place to add some real conflict. Like the Terrans could be in denial that the Autobots could ever do bad and cause just as much destruction in this big scary war. Maybe this whole thing makes the Terrans kind of reconsider their friendship with Megatron when they see the damage he's done to the reputation of the Cybertronian race and how many people he's indirectly killed. Very validly, humans do not trust Cybertronians, all because of Megatron. How does this affect their relationship with him? But anyway, Stevie is told he's wrong to feel that way, and that's that. Humans who hate or are scared of Transformers are shown to be objectively bad people, regardless of what happened to them personally that led to those biases being formed. Meanwhile, humans who like them are almost completely infallible and kind. The end of the episode has hashtag become possessed by Mandroid to do his bidding, and there's this big fight between her and the rest of the Terrans. If anything, this is proving the stereotype Stevie laid out in the first place. They're destroying everything. They're causing all this destruction and damage, and for what? The episode ends with Stevie spray painting the graffiti we saw earlier to reflect more positively on the Transformers, despite the Terrans doing everything he just villainized them for. Stevie shows up for one scene, is racist, and then returns right at the end to show that racism is wrong. How did he learn this lesson? Is the implication that everybody somehow learnt this lesson and we just didn't see it? Just like most of the things in this show, this isn't explored any further. I'm not expecting a kids cartoon to talk about how racism in the real world isn't just about individual attitudes, but is instead embedded in institutions, laws, culture, economics, and so on. But when the show reduces prejudice to one chuddy kid and a mean sign that can be so easily fixed, it risks teaching kids that racism is a simple misunderstanding solved by a quick gesture, which it isn't. I know it's simplified for kids to understand that racism is bad in an easy to digest way, but I think this is another instance of this show telling kids that difficult feelings can be solved very easily and very quickly. I feel like I need to clarify again for all of you in the back that broadly speaking, the message is good. Obviously, racism is a bad thing and it should be called out. The story is also trying to teach kids that the othering of migrants and refugees is unfair and it hurts them and makes them sad. Most kids don't like making other kids feel sad on purpose, unless they're like that asshole February Michaels from 3rd grade. Screw you, February Michaels. You kept hogging the tire swing. No wonder your dad left you. Like I just said, this is obviously a thinly veiled immigration and refugee allegory. And this raises another issue. This is not how refugees in the real world work. On our planet Earth, refugees and asylum seekers do not go to other countries and bring their war with them. They immigrate to other countries to escape war and persecution. They don't enter another country with their armies and continue to fight their war on another country's soil. The key difference is that the Decepticons didn't immigrate, they invaded. These two very different things are made out to be one and the same, and simplifying this does kids no favors. If anything, this teaches kids that refugees and asylum seekers are a problem. Did nobody making this show think through the implications of what they were doing here. The optics of this supposedly progressive kids show accidentally parroting anti-migrant rhetoric is crazy. I've seen some people read this episode as pro-colonization as well, which I'm fairly certain was not the intended message here. I'm not one to talk as a member of the country which colonizes countries like it's a GDQ speedrun, but I think the fact that this is also a totally valid reading of the text given what is presented just goes to show how off the mark Earthspark's themes can be. The episode I mentioned earlier, Warzone, is the episode directly before Home, and it feels like it's laying the foundation to explore this idea that humans hate Transformers. Humans obviously hate Megatron because he was the leader of the big evil army that killed millions of humans, but weirdly, the episode doesn't dwell on the casualties of the war, and instead it devotes a large chunk of its time to telling us how sad it is that the Transformers can't return to Cybertron. Like, humans dying is mentioned in passing, and we're shown a couple of pictures of some landmarks getting blowed up. But the way this episode is structured makes the fact the Allspark was lost seem like a bigger tragedy than the loss of who knows how many innocent lives. I can't tell if this was a conscious decision on the part of the writers or not. The fact that Megatron's idea of the biggest loss in that big final battle wasn't the loss of life, but his failure as a leader to get his people home. If this was intentional, the show does nothing to call it out. I don't think they actually meant for it to be interpreted this way. I think it was an accident. So in summary, just so we're all clear, in Transformers Earthspark, humans are victims of the Cybertronian invasion and are rightfully upset that these big scary robots came out of nowhere, killed who knows how many people, and are now just sticking around because they literally cannot leave. The victims in this situation are rightfully upset and angry that the aliens invaded and killed a ton of humans. And they're scared because there's a bunch of Decepticons on the loose that we see do really scary and deadly stuff. But the narrative the show presents to us is that they're wrong to feel this way, because Transformers have feelings too, even though they can never undo the damage that was done and bring back those that were lost. Therefore, Transformers Earthspark teaches the lesson that victims have to get over their grief and live with their invaders, otherwise they're not better than those who invaded in the first place. The humans' feelings are a direct response to an ever-looming threat to their home that they're expected to just be okay with. Like, is this not a really, really weird thing to not only write about, but teach kids? Okay, so that got a little heavy. It got kind of serious there, didn't it? How about we take 5 and watch an episode of Rescue Bots real quick to cheer everybody up? All better? Okay, good. Let's move on. Number 2. Nightshade and gender. If you told me 10 years ago that the most controversial aspect of the most recent Transformers show would be a non-binary owl robot, I would have told you to leave my house immediately and let me get back to playing Rooftop Rumble in GTA Online. The controversy around the character of Nightshade reached all the most beloved people on the internet. All the most joyous and kind and accepting people had such nice things to say about the state of being of a green robot owl. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you Nightshade being non-binary is manipulating kids, because I really don't think that's the case. There's a wider discussion to be had about presenting LGBT rep in kids television, which I'm not gonna get into. That's not why we're here. I just want to talk about Nightshade and how they're represented. The good, the bad, and the ugly of it. Before I get into that though, I do want to preface this with a very brief disclaimer. I know a lot of LGBT people felt very touched and very seen by Nightshade in this show, and the last thing I'd want to do is to make anybody feel invalidated by some of the things I'm about to say. If you felt validated by Nightshade, I want you to know that this is not an attack on you or your gender identity. I do actually quite like Nightshade as a character, and I think they're a really fun presence in the show, but this section was born entirely out of my own experiences with gender dysphoria. My dissatisfaction with how Nightshade was written and treated by the show is kind of one of the reasons this entire video exists in the first place. This means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to you too. And you're free to disagree with anything I'm about to say. I won't be upset if we disagree here. I promise. Nightshade shows up in episode 10 of the show alongside Jawbreaker and Hashtag. From Nightshade's very first scene, they are completely assured in who they are. They are confident in their own identity, outgoing and proud of themselves. And that's great. Contrasting with the other Terrans who all have ways to go in finding themselves, Nightshade seems to have themselves fully sorted out. They briefly explain that they're non-binaries who are very confused yet supportive Optimus Prime, and the show moves on.
Nightshade's pronouns are they, them.
He or she just doesn't fit who I am.
My apologies. Please
They,
switch.
them.
He or she just doesn't fit who
Of course. Now, the plan. Our new Terrans will pretend...
Nightshade's pronouns are they, them.
Of course.
He or she just doesn't fit.
Their first and only focus episode is episode 13, Missed Connection. In this episode, Nightshade meets with a Decepticon outcast named Tarantulas. The two bond over their isolation. Nightshade feels distant from the other Terrans because they would rather make stuff in their lab than hang out with the others. While Tarantulas has been isolated by his own accord, he's living in hiding, trying to find a way to blend in with humanity using a hologram thingy so Ghost doesn't put him in giant robot jail. This episode explores a concept I don't see in a lot of LGBT media, how the older queer generation talks to the queer youth of today.
I was so desperate to have Nightshade have a queer elder, and that was also a bot, and that somewhat is Tarantulas to a certain extent.
Tarantulas doesn't display a lot of typical queer-coded traits, but a lot of his dialogue and the way he relates to Nightshade makes this a completely valid reading of the episode to me. Tarantulas is cynical AF, and he's caught off guard by how bubbly and optimistic Nightshade is. Tarantulas has seen this war through to the end. He knows shit ain't easy or black and white, but Nightshade is full of hope and wonder for this new world. Tarantulas is taken back by how sure of themselves Nightshade is at such a young age. All the while, Tarantulas doesn't feel comfortable in who he is now. 2 episodes ago, Nightshade yapped about how they don't need to find an alt mode because they feel comfortable with who they are.
Together, we'll pick the perfect alt modes for everyone!
No thank you. I like who I am as I am.
In this episode, Tarantulas explains to Nightshade why this perspective is misguided, and I honestly thought these were the best lines in the whole damn show.
But I don't want an alt form.
You are a Transformer. Another mode is your birthright.
I see no need for one.
Alt forms aren't meant to complete you, as though you have a missing part. They further express who you already are. And you, Nightshade, however you may appear, who will you be?
I'll be me.
It is a gift to know yourself so well, so young. Take pride in that.
Relating this back to stinky reality, this is a cool parallel to the real-world older queer generation carrying trauma that the younger generation doesn't have. Older queers grew up in a world that villainized and stigmatized them.
Public restrooms can often be a hangout for the homosexual.
And while some of those stigmas exist to this day, the younger generation has grown up with more community support and encouragement to express themselves. With this context, the parallels in Nightshade and Tarantulas' little story become so clear that you can see right through the show despite the janitor from the Hasbro office waving right back at you. This is all great. I genuinely love this. There's a really powerful struggle here between someone who's been taught to survive through hiding and someone who's been taught to thrive through visibility. It's really smart. I did think the metaphor was a tiny little bit messy with Tarantulas not feeling comfortable in himself now because he's literally being hunted. Like, it's not like he has to find himself in the way Nightshade has to. It's like he has to change who he is in order to live a quiet and peaceful life. But I appreciate the sentiment, as messy as the setup is. I think it's interesting that a show for kids is talking about this sort of stuff. This gets a 7 out of 10. It just makes it all the more unfortunate that the episode has to end with a studio-mandated big robot fight between Nightshade and Tarantulas. Tarantulas does a really weird 180 because he misunderstands the relationship Nightshade has with the humans. He kidnaps the parents and threatens to wipe their minds because he feels threatened by them, and he misinterprets their existence as being a threat to Nightshade. Instead of just explaining what's going on and sympathizing with Tarantulas like Nightshade has been doing throughout the episode, they instead burn down his house and beat the gobshite out of him. Tarantulas is totally right to be scared and asks very valid questions that Nightshade just doesn't answer. Nightshade even says,
Tarantulas! If only you'd listen!
But like, they just don't explain themselves at all? What do you mean, listen? You're not saying anything.
No, Bumblebee. Tarantulas only did this because he thought he was protecting me. He didn't realize Mom and Dad were my parents and that they protect me.
Then why didn't you explain it? I'm going crazy. The conflict of this episode is built entirely around a rushed misunderstanding just so we can have a big robot fight, because the first 15 minutes of this episode are just the characters standing around talking. You gotta have action or the kiddies will get bored. Hello, McFly. Also, Tarantulas mentions in passing that he got this memory erasing gun from Ghost, which is another instance of Ghost doing something really messed up that is never brought into question.
This device was designed by Ghost for use on Cybertronians.
Tarantulas has every right to be afraid of human and Cybertronian relations. He literally has a human-made weapon made to wipe the minds of Cybertronians as proof. But Nightshade still treats him like he's some kind of crazy psycho for acting irrationally. I mean, he kind of is, since he kidnapped humans, but you get what I mean. The episode is called Missed Connection, and I can't help but feel this episode ironically missed the connection between Nightshade and Tarantulas and why it worked. His paranoia began as understandable, but then it's framed as dangerous and irrational. The episode stops being a dialogue between generations. It becomes another good versus evil conflict with a clear winner and loser. I know this is less the fault of the writers and more an issue of the format the show resides in, but it still sucks. They were so close to like making a point. Doesn't the allegory you're going for kind of become null and void the moment you portray the older generation of queers as actually being both terrified victims of oppression and irrational weirdos? Tarantulas wanted to save Nightshade from what he thought were human oppressors, which makes sense, but the conflict feels so tacked on and easy to solve, and in turn, it makes the LGBT aspect of the story feel so muddled. Nightshade was already comfortable with who they were. They just had to learn to express themselves in a way that doesn't shut them off from the rest of their siblings. That's their little arc in this episode, and it carries into the rest of the season. After this episode, Nightshade spends more time with the rest of the Terrans and the humans. I do like the concept of that. I just don't know if this was the right way to teach this lesson. I'm sure you could get this lesson across without having Tarantulas and Nightshade fight each other. But with the way it's presented now, it makes me wonder if a kids show where the characters have to fight at the end is really the kind of place you should be teaching such a sensitive lesson. So, okay, Earthspark's first foray into exploring the themes of gender identity is kinda all over the place. It started out with promise, but it couldn't stick the landing, which is really unfortunate. While it had a good foundation, that second half really bothered me. So much so that by the time we get to Nightshade's next little moment, which is 4 episodes later, it was still pretty fresh in my mind. I was waiting for them to do something more with the LGBT side of Nightshade's character, and lucky me, they did. Unfortunately, this was like the time my mechanic swapped out my broken catalytic converters with 20 LEGO Ninjago Tournament of Elements Kai minifigures crammed into my exhaust pipe. You messed it up so bad, it's killing me. You might have remembered earlier when we were on the whole humans being racist thing. I mentioned the episode Home had a second big idea that it tackled. Well, this is it. We're here now. I didn't tell you to put a pin in that one, but I hope you did, because I trust you. You're all really smart, and I hope you all have a good day with the knowledge that I love you and I value your intelligence. In Home, Nightshade meets a non-binary human named Sam, and the two have a 44-second long conversation about the term non-binary and what it means. I do like this scene. I think it's cute and a nice little message in a bubble. Nightshade finds a term that allows them to fully express who they are, and it makes them very happy. It's the end of their arc. Nightshade fully accepts who they are and is content with their place in the world.
I know I'm safe when I'm with my friends or other non-binary people.
Non-binary?
People who aren't female or male.
I always knew my pronouns felt right, but what a wonderful word for a wonderful experience.
Right before this scene, Nightshade saves Sam from a mugger by acting really scary and then flying them to safety. We then learn that Sam trusts Nightshade, not because they just saved them, but because Nightshade is non-binary. I think that's weird, but it's like, it's fine, I guess. It's not a big deal, it just kind of implies that you should always trust LGBT people, like I know a few LGBT people who happen to be assholes, actually. I don't know if I can fully back that. I am like 70% joking. I just thought this line was kind of funny in a sort of like blind optimism kind of way. I'm nitpicking right now, so I'm just gonna move on. Now, you might have noticed a minute ago, I said in a bubble, right? I think it's cute and a nice little message in a bubble. That's because, on its own, I like it. But within the context of the episode, it's like sandpaper rubbing against the surface of my colon. And by that I mean, it's rough. My issue with this is the way it's framed in the larger narrative of the episode, in that it's not acknowledged at all. Nightshade's story ends with that scene on the rooftop, which is tacked onto a larger story about racism and immigration, as discussed earlier. The story kind of stops for a minute so we can quickly wrap up Nightshade's character and move on and never mention the fact that they're non-binary ever again. And I can't help but feel like creating such a heavy scene in a manner that's so detached from the episode undermines its authenticity. It almost feels like it was placed into an episode where they could easily remove it if censors demanded them to. I don't know. That's speculation. I'm just guessing. I have no basis in that assessment. May Cat Cat, one of the writers for both of the episodes we just discussed, said that Nick and Hasbro were totally okay with Nightshade. So I don't really understand why this character beat was communicated in this way.
I was so impressed that not only this was happening, but that Hasbro was as supportive and as excited as they were about it. And like, they've always been particularly excited and particularly supportive of Nightshade.
The scene on the roof in the broader scale of the show doesn't affect Nightshade, nor does it affect how anybody treats them since we never see Sam ever again. It feels like the scene is trying to educate the audience on what the term non-binary means, which is fine for a kids show, but Earthspark doesn't explore or educate its audience why being non-binary matters to someone like Nightshade, or why it's important and more than just a buzzword. By not really doing anything with this, it stops feeling like a story and it starts to feel like a PSA, and not a fun one either.
Splink!
Less like the G1 PSAs and more like the one with the eggs in the pan, you know?
This is what happens to your brain after snorting heroin.
For a subject this serious and complex, it feels extremely surface level. And again, maybe that's a problem with the medium Earthspark is trapped within. You could argue that Nightshade's non-binariness never being mentioned again is a good thing, that Nightshade isn't defined by their gender identity, and instead by their genius and kindness. And that's fine, I agree with that. But the issue here isn't the fact it isn't really relevant again, it's that Nightshade just stops being a character the instant that scene on the rooftop ends. Weirdly, all of a sudden, Nightshade's sureness in themselves and love for their own identity is replaced with a love of science and inventing things. Like, yeah, that was an aspect of their character before, but now it's their whole character. This unwillingness to explore Nightshade's gender identity any further, not just later on, but in the first season too, makes this whole thing feel more performative than anything. But I know for a fact that this wasn't the case, because May Cat takes pride in their efforts to bring a non-binary character to the screen.
I want Nightshade to become one of the most beloved characters of all time.
I respect that, and I appreciate May Cat for taking this risk. I just don't think it entirely landed. Again, I don't know if the creatives behind this show were forced to dial down on tackling this stuff, but regardless of what happened, the final product feels like it's missing something. And by the time of season 2 and 3, after a large chunk of the original creative team left, Nightshade kind of fades into the background. I'm just saying, it's a little strange that in these later seasons, Nightshade is the only Terran who doesn't have a lot of screen time dedicated to them anymore. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, I just thought it was interesting. I really don't know if they'll ever be properly acknowledged or utilized like this ever again, and that makes me kind of sad that the first ever on-screen explicitly non-binary character in this franchise is being sidelined like this. Call me hysterical, call me crazy, but it's sad, right? An excuse I hear a bunch defending some of the weirder aspects of Nightshade's little arc is that an attempt at representation is better than no representation at all. Generally, I don't agree with this statement, but I guess it depends on how bad the representation is. In Earthspark's case, I don't think Nightshade creates a damaging view of the LGBT community, and I don't think they're offensive or stereotypical. So in this case, I guess something is better than nothing. I just wish that something was a little better. I'll end this segment with the words of May Cat, who I thought summed up my feelings on this whole thing quite well.
I do want to say, and I want to emphasize, everyone is always supportive. Everyone from Hasbro, from Nickelodeon, from the creative side, from the non-creative side, everyone really earnestly wants this representation. They just don't know how to always follow through with it. They don't know how to do it right. They're scared to make a mistake, and so sometimes it turns into a heated discussion that you weren't expecting, but like, I have to commend them. Their hearts are in the right place, and they've consistently been in the right place, even if things have been a little difficult here and there.
Do you think Transformers is a franchise?
Yeah, no, there's always a possibility.
Where are you from?
But yeah, I mean, look, all of our pop culture and all of our media is inevitably queer in some manner.
Awesome.
RC's trans.
Awesome.
I want to emphasize, everyone is queer in some manner.
Awesome.
Cobra Commander and G.I. Joe and Jazz and the Matrix of Leadership and Derek Wyatt and drugs. They've always been extremely queer to me, and I hope to help them always be that way for everyone else.
Number 3, Jawbreaker and autism or something. Now, almost every one of these ideas, these questions and themes the show presents, all fall flat in one way or another. But I want to end this on a more positive note, so I'm going to talk about a story in Earthspark that completely worked for me. To be honest, the only character in this entire show with a meaningful arc that actually sticks the landing to me is Jawbreaker. His story made me really happy, and it kind of made me wish I had seen this growing up when I was in this show's target age demographic. I'm not saying this is the only character arc in the entire show that's good, because there's a few smaller ones I haven't mentioned which I like, but this is the one that resonated with me the most. Jawbreaker's whole thing is that he can't find an alt mode. While the rest of the Terrans are able to get theirs fairly quickly after their debut, Jawbreaker spends the majority of the first season unable to transform into anything at all. I think I said this before, but alt modes are Earthspark's way of conveying the theme of identity. So in turn, Jawbreaker feels like he doesn't even know who he is because he can't transform. He feels left out and isolated from the others. It could be read as like a younger sibling who feels pressured to fit in by their flourishing brothers and sisters, or even delayed development. I've seen a few different readings of this. Obviously, Jawbreaker's upset about not finding an alt mode. He can't take part in training with his siblings, he can't play the same games as them, he's not as fast as them, and he just seems to have a severe lack of confidence because he feels inadequate next to them. This all comes to a head in the episode Outtakes, where Jawbreaker's attempts to find an alt mode have gotten increasingly desperate. In this episode, Jawbreaker finds a camera and starts interviewing the other bots about how they found their alt modes, because he thinks it's the only way he can get people to open up to him. I can relate to this because I operate in this exact manner. That's why I film all my interactions with all my friends and why I set up a camera in Kian Carlisle's house.
Patch me to Cybertron.
Oh my god.
Command.
Pause. Enhance. Oh my god! I knew that was Optimus!
Hashtag gets involved because she wants to be a movie director, and together they have a cute little adventure where they talk to a few of the legacy characters about how they figured themselves out. Hashtag helps Jawbreaker open up and ask the right questions to these characters, and it's really sweet. But Hashtag is a little too eager, and she tries to force Jawbreaker to find an alt mode so her movie will have a satisfying ending. Jawbreaker comes to realize that he's been doing all this to try and fit in with the others rather than doing it because he's ready. Hashtag gets so caught up in making her movie that she doesn't take into account how she can't force Jawbreaker to make this really important choice. He has this really cute scene with Alita 1 where she explains how she was a late bloomer too, and that's okay. She helps expand Jawbreaker's view of what finding an alt mode means, and helps him realize that his time will come when it's right.
But what if I'm different?
You know, it took me forever to find an Earth alt mode too. Nothing I saw ever felt right. So I waited and waited and waited.
And then?
My spark told me what was right.
But what if I'm broken or something? When I look at cars, I feel nothing.
Then maybe you weren't meant to be a vehicle.
You can scan other things?
Almost anything you want. It's up to you.
Thanks, Alita.
In the end, Jawbreaker finishes Hashtag's movie for her and explains what he's learned throughout the episode.
Before, I thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't know why I couldn't just pick an alt mode like everybody else. Well, it's because I'm not like everybody else. You showed me that.
Really?
I'm not gonna be a car or a truck or anything like that. I don't know what I'll be. But when I feel it in my spark, you'll be the first one to know.
Hashtag helped Jawbreaker in his journey of self-discovery, and in turn, Jawbreaker helped Hashtag finish her movie and reassured her in her ability to help people emotionally. And it just feels really nice. Like, no caveats or anything, the episode on its own is genuinely really sweet, and I love its message. It's one of my favorite overall Transformers things from the last few years. It's great. I don't often open up my heart like this on this channel, but this shit means something to me, man. This episode is an encapsulation of the overarching coming-of-age story that's at the heart of Earthspark's mission statement. If every episode was this good, we'd have peak Formers peak Spark on our hands, and this video wouldn't exist. It's a really wonderful piece of representation that doesn't feel diluted or dumbed down for its audience of children. The episode isn't even a perfect 10 out of 10, but its message and the way it's communicated is just so nice and sweet and honest, and I loved it. Jawbreaker's follow-up episode where he finally gets his alt mode isn't as good as this one, but it's like Okay. In this episode, Jawbreaker tries to fit in by being fierce and tough like his hero Grimlock, but he discovers he's trying to be something he isn't, and he has to learn that his greatest strength is his big ol' heart. The main conflict of the episode isn't resolved through punches and kicks, it's through Jawbreaker just talking to Grimlock and getting on his level, and that's cute. I can live with that. I'm coping. I also think it's really neat that Jawbreaker says that when he finds his alt mode, hashtag will be the first to know, and when he eventually does find his alt mode later in the show, hashtag is the first to see it. It's neat. It's like a little bow on top. Yippee! This is lovely. I mentioned a couple minutes ago that Jawbreaker's story is all about delayed development, but I really feel like it's primarily an allegory for neurodivergence. A lot of his behavior and experiences are about being different in a way the other Terrans in Earthspark don't fully get to explore in their little arcs. Jawbreaker learns and feels things in his own way and at his own pace, and nobody else in the family seems to get that at first. The pressure to find an alt mode feels like a deliberate parallel to how neurodivergent people are treated by their neurotypical peers, especially when they're growing up. Jawbreaker isn't lazy or broken, he just works differently. The fact that Outtakes makes that okay, that it tells kids you don't have to rush becoming your true self, is honestly amazing. When Alita tells him he'll find his alt mode in his own time, she's not saying you'll get there eventually in a way that invalidates or talks down to Jawbreaker. She's saying there's nothing wrong with how your brain works. It's one of the few times in Earthspark where one of the legacy characters validates the kid's differences without trying to fix it. When Jawbreaker finally finds his alt mode, it's because he genuinely feels ready. He's hyped himself up for this. It's not framed as he's finally normal, but as he's finally comfortable in who he is. It's not about becoming like everyone else, it's about learning to exist as yourself without shame or urgency. That's a form of representation I've never seen handled this gently in a kids show, and it's part of what makes Jawbreaker's story so special to me. It's just... Look, I had you for a second, didn't I? You thought this shit worked in the long term? Wrong. Look, Jawbreaker's story doesn't get completely ruined or anything, but its message becomes, again, kind of messy in the wider context of the show. They don't completely undo his development, but it really feels like the show manages to undercut the message of Outtakes for the sake of mining jokes out of the fact that Jawbreaker is big and slow and can't do the things everybody else can. Oh my god, it's animated Bulkhead all over again. But now it's even worse because it's not an implication anymore. I'm gonna crash out. You made me remember all the times they're mean to Bulkhead Transformers animated. Obviously, not every episode can focus on Jawbreaker and his story. It'd be silly to assume that every episode going forward has to focus on Jawbreaker's self-esteem issues because I personally like this aspect of the character. But after Outtakes, I'd expect the show would start treating him with some sensitivity and not like a complete joke.
Why is the one without an alt mode the bait?
It's not like massively cruel, and it doesn't even happen that often, but the way they frame him definitely changes. Like, this has to be because of a miscommunication between writers, right? The message of Outtakes was that you're fine the way you are, but when Earthspark starts bringing up Jawbreaker's differences as a punchline, it starts to sound more like, you're fine, but it's kind of funny that you're not as awesome and cool and able-bodied as everybody else, right? I don't think this was done with malicious intent, but it's weird. He stops being an allegory for self-acceptance and just becomes the funny big one who can't transform. And when Jawbreaker finally does get his alt mode, what is he now? Just one of the boys, you know? Just having a bunch of bevies with the boys. Jawbreaker's character and his arc are built entirely around the fact there's something different about him. And once the show resolves that difference, there's not much left for him to be. It's like the writers don't know what to do with him after he finally transformed for the first time. As if his only reason to exist was to fulfill the one who's different quota. The show never looks into how Jawbreaker's experience shapes him afterwards, or what he wants beyond finally catching up with everybody else. But honestly, this is kind of a wider issue with most of the show's cast. Like Nightshade. Once their arc is over, they just stop being relevant. It's kind of sad. At least Jawbreaker had the luxury of 2 entire episodes dedicated to his story, which can't be said for almost everybody else. By the time we get to the second season, this autistic coded character, which was so wonderfully utilized to showcase showcase that it's okay to be different, is now reduced to a complete idiot that doesn't know his ass from his elbow. It's actually shocking what they do to him. And it further cements my theory that the new writers for Earthspark's later half accidentally had the series Bible swapped out for a copy of Freddy Got Fingered on VHS. In the first season, Jawbreaker makes mistakes. He does stupid shit, but so does everybody else. Like normal mistakes that kids make. Jawbreaker's naive. He doesn't understand the same social cues the others do. But that doesn't mean he's stupid. He has a degree of emotional intelligence. And a lot of the time, he's able to overcome those hurdles, just like the other Terrans, because he's not a complete knucklehead. And you know, to portray him in that way after framing him as being your autistic rep, that'd be kind of weird and gross at this point, right? In Transformers Earthspark Season 2, Jawbreaker is almost completely ignorant to anything happening in the world around him. He misunderstands the most basic of basic social cues, and overall acts like a completely different, flanderized version of the character we originally saw in Season 1. Awesome! I'm sorry for bringing up Season 2 and 3 again when I said I wouldn't, but it's just so frustrating that the empathy, the introspection, and the willingness to even attempt these ideas were all dropped when the second season began. But whatever, what's done is done. I appreciated you when you meant something, JB, but you no longer do. I know this is difficult for both of us, but I think it would be best if we went our separate ways. Signed, a concerned viewer.
Scanning your alt mode isn't some sort of magic. There's a special magic component inside of you. Inside every bot. It's called the cock.
The cock. How do you know I have one?
Jawbreaker, let you in on a little secret. You don't need a cock. You know, it took me forever to find nothing.
And then?
My cock told me what was right.
But when I look at cocks, I feel nothing.
Then maybe you're nothing.
Thanks, Alita.
Speaking of being done, we're finished here. Well, kinda. This next idea I'm gonna talk about is so big and important, I'm dedicating an entire part to it. It's about everybody's favorite Seeker, the one who's always been at Megatron's side. That's right, we're talking about Blast. Part 4. Starscream and his band of merry Decepticons. I'm about to make a crazy statement and I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. This is one of the worst Starscreams we've ever had on screen. I guess you could say he's better than the Bumblebee movie Starscream because he, you know, at least says lines and he has things to do. I mean, it's cool that Steve Bloom is back playing him again too. He's my favorite Starscream voice actor. I really like him and it's as if he never left. He's still really good. His design is okay, I guess. I don't really have any strong opinions on it one way or the other, but I do like his little fork beard. It reminds me of the fact that he'd look like an ugly freak if he was a human, which he should. But Starscream's story in Earthspark really bothers me. A common criticism of this show's second and third season is the handling of Starscream. How he went from a tortured soul with deep scars to the butt of every single joke, with all personality having been surgically removed from his body like you played Operation on the body of Douglas Levison.
You obviously don't have the talent. You don't have enough respect for yourself or other people.
But honestly, I never vibed with Earthspark Starscream in the first place. Before we get into why though, I need to give you a quick rundown on the diva known as Maycat.
I am the gay agenda.
I mentioned Maycat earlier in this video if you were paying any attention at all. I know there's at least one person watching named Alex who wasn't. Maycat is the script editor for Transformers Earthspark, and she wrote Starscream's Spotlight episode, What Dwells Within. I should say up front, I do like the majority of Maycat's body of Transformers work. She wrote a load of episodes of Cyberverse I really enjoyed, and she was able to give some of the characters in War for Cybertron Kingdom some like personality and like agency. It's just something I find a little strange about her interpretation of Transformers is that she has a vision of Starscream suffering as a result of Megatron's treatment of him. And I don't mean like how in every other Transformers story, Megatron gets upset with Starscream and then Starscream grovels or betrays him or tries to kill him or whatever. Maycat talks about Starscream as if he's a victim, and so does a small but ever-growing portion of the Transformers fandom. It's become kind of popular in the last few years. I don't know if you guys noticed.
I would love a Starscream that is written past the point of abuse, that is part of his history. Not necessarily him just being like, oh, woe was I was hurt, but like, that's just a staple of who he is and he knows that shit happened to him. You know, around Kingdom, I was able to sort of pitch Hasbro on this notion of like, hey, I think the sustainability of your character is going to be predicated on whether or not you address this history at all. You totally could just like not acknowledge it whatsoever. But for my money, I'm like, no, you gotta fold that into the character and, you know, even write him past that point in his history and like how's that affected him, how will that continue to affect him, etc., etc.
Awesome.
The point is, I don't think I like it. I don't know if it's controversial, but I just don't really vibe with Starscream when he's portrayed that way. I guess this is a different strokes for different folks thing, because a lot of people dug his characterization in Earthspark Season 1. Although I should mention that Starscream was one of the more contentious aspects of the show's writing when Season 1 was coming out. Some argued it was insensitive because, like Megatron, why should we feel sorry for somebody who probably took part in the murder of millions and still verbally abuses his peers to this day? And the other side argued that we don't know enough about Starscream and Earthspark to know how responsible he is for all that stuff, so perhaps we should feel bad for him. Oh look, there's that mystery pin from the start. You know the one I mean. The one about Megatron leading his army onto Earth, and how we aren't let into much about anything he did at all. No, don't take it out yet. Be patient, doofus. You nincompoop, you dunce. Generally, I like Starscream because he's a gigantic piece of shit that tries his absolute hardest to get his way. I don't think it's controversial to say that you can like a character even if they're the most evil guy ever. Sometimes you just love to hate somebody, you know? In my opinion, I think the majority of the time, Starscream is far too irredeemable and slimy to warrant this sort of sympathetic viewpoint. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just personally, I do not entirely agree with writing Starscream this way. If this works for you, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, because you're not. And I'm not saying it could never work either. That's the difference between having the creativity to do whatever you want and having a restrictive protectiveness of these characters that I'm sure we all hold so dearly. It could work if there was like a really good justification for why Starscream isn't actually as evil as we've been led to believe. Unfortunately, I just don't think Earthspark finds that justification, or weirdly, even comes close to suggesting one. Obviously, this is a very touchy subject matter, and I'm no psychologist. I'm not about to tell you why abusers deserve a second chance or how people who get abused don't deserve any sympathy or something equally is done. I just want to talk about why making this particular version of the fictional character Starscream a victim in this manner doesn't really come together for me. The episode itself follows the Terrans, the kids, Starscream, and the other Seekers getting trapped underground with a big monster that references an episode of G1 that only people who goon over Season 3 remember. In this episode, Hashtag sympathizes with Starscream because he talks a little bit about how Megatron was cruel to him and hurt him, and Starscream clearly has some trauma over the way he's been treated by old Buckethead.
You should go back to following Megatron. He wouldn't leave anyone behind like that.
Ah, naive child. You don't know the real Megatron, the ruthless tyrant who ruled over us with fear and intimidation. I need you to do your little door trick and get us out of here.
No, I won't!
You have to, or else
Is this how Megatron treated you?
You believe me?
I believe he hurt you.
You don't know me. You couldn't possibly understand what I've been through.
Then tell me.
On its own, I do like all this stuff with Starscream and Hashtag. She acknowledges that he's suffered and she wants to help. Hashtag doesn't downplay the situation or try to make excuses for Megatron. She hears Starscream out. For the first time, somebody believes Starscream's story of how Megatron hurt him, and he's able to prove to our heroes that he isn't a selfish monster by saving Hashtag at the end of the story. That's fine. It does kind of give like 50-year-old man venting to a minor, but it kind of works in the moment, I guess. But you've probably guessed how they screwed it up by now, so you might as well just take a pin out right now. Pull that pin out like it's a hand grenade. There you go. Once again, we just do not know enough about Starscream to have any grounding in this whole situation or to feel any sympathy for him. The closest we get to understanding what Starscream might have been up to or responsible for without Megatron commanding him is this scene in Warzone, where Shockwave talks about the Decepticons' plans when Megatron isn't around.
We will conquer this planet and resurrect our own under Decepticon rule.
I'm not saying like, Well, how are we supposed to feel bad for the abused guy when we don't have the full picture? If you apply that logic to the real world, it's really gross and unfair to actual victims. I'm talking about the way abuse is portrayed in fiction. Remember that, it's fiction. Specifically in a show that's, again, trying to teach kids serious real-world lessons. Knowing the nature of Megatron and Starscream's relationship and the specifics of the abuse received feel fundamental when you're trying to write a piece of fiction about this very, very heavy subject matter. Because we know Starscream did bad things. We know he was second in command to this genocidal army. I'm not expecting the kids show to go into graphic detail about this terrible thing that happens to real people. I just think not knowing a single thing about Starscream and Megatron's relationship makes this whole thing feel really abrupt and weird. Like all of a sudden, Megatron isn't the redeemed hero that we've been following this whole time. That could work as a big plot twist, where our understanding of the character fundamentally changes for our protagonists. But it doesn't feel like a twist because there's absolutely no follow-up to this and Megatron faces no consequences. The show doesn't even attempt to grill Megatron about all this stuff. Once again, he's just kinda let off the hook with no repercussions. The Terrans learn that Megatron was a huge piece of shit even though they already kind of knew that based off the fact he manufactured a genocide against the entire population of Earth. I swear to God, none of this is ever brought up ever again. Hell, it's not even alluded to. This should be a big moment, right? The kids finally get a first-hand account of how cruel and evil their best friend Megatron was. Surely it should shake up their perception of him, right? Because we're never told what the abuse was, or if it was specific to Starscream, or if the other Decepticons also received the same abuse. And the fact that the story going forward does nothing to build upon this revelation for the rest of the season and beyond, it just makes this whole thing feel really cheap. Like you could totally make an audience sympathize with Starscream, but you need that context. The suddenness of this whole thing and the fact there are no lasting consequences for any of the characters make this whole thing feel really ham-fisted. And I think the last thing you want to do when you're addressing such a serious issue is to come across as ham-fisted. And that's from me, the master of fisting. Something else that really bothered me in this attempt at dealing with a very serious topic is that throughout this episode, Starscream is pretty nasty to the other Decepticons, right? That's kind of the point, that he's acting like this because of how badly Megatron treated him. It's the cycle of violence and stuff. Starscream is probably just as abusive as Megatron. He treats others how he was treated. But when Hashtag begins relating her experiences to Starscream's, it starts to raise some very quirky flags for me.
You couldn't possibly understand what I've been through.
Then tell me, when bad things happen, it isn't always our fault. There was this Mandroid guy, and he hacked my systems, and I...
Again, fundamentally, I do not have an issue with the idea of Hashtag sympathizing with Starscream, but when she begins comparing her experiences with his, it starts to feel even more misguided than previously imagined. We are going even further beyond. I'm not sure if you guys remember, but I mentioned that in the racism episode, Hashtag was possessed by Mandroid to cause destruction and make Transformers look worse in the eyes of the humans. Relating that experience back to Starscream's abuses so weird. Hashtag literally had no control over what she was doing. She didn't have a choice, but Starscream has a choice. He's fully in control of his actions. He has agency, and he chooses to be mean and abusive to the others. It's not out of his control. Why are you treating these situations as if they're at all morally similar? So what, does that make Screamer innocent? Yeah, I called him Screamer. We're close friends. I'm allowed to do that. I just don't get it. Obviously, people can be bad and do bad things, but grow and change into better people. That doesn't mean you have to forgive them, but like it's just how the world works. Sometimes bad people become good, but that isn't what Earthspark is saying. It's somehow managing to say that if someone who was hurt hurts others, it's okay because their pain automatically cancels out their responsibility. By skirting Starscream's accountability like this, doesn't this also mean that Megatron is blameless since he's a victim of the systems in place on Cybertron? Who are we blaming now? Sentinel Prime? Darkwing? How far up the chain do you want to go? It's such a narrow-minded child's view of how this thing works. And you can say, well, Hashtag is literally a child, of course she would say something as childish as this. But then by doing that, we reach the pedantics of excusing questionable writing decisions with real-world logic when this situation should never have happened to begin with. This sucks, man. This idea that Starscream is beyond reproach and forgivable makes me uncomfortable, and I do not like it one bit. He's not an ooh-woo soft boy, he's a bad fella who still does bad things, who's being sympathized with by a child who doesn't have context for anything that's going on. It's really weird weird, and again, I'm certain the writers didn't intend for this to be viewed in this way. But unfortunately, through another incredible oversight, the accidental lesson of the episode is that abusers have no control over their actions, or at least some don't. I don't know. This one line where they relate Starscream's abuse to hashtag's possession just ruins it.
You're just ruining it. Look at my lips, you're ruining it.
Let's talk about G1 for a minute. Specifically, why the Decepticons are the way they are in that show. Optimus Prime runs a tight ship of nice Autobots who mostly love each other's company and get along very well. They watch TV together, they play games, they hang out with humans, they play in the snow, they dance, they get turned into mermen. The point is, the Autobots are kind and friendly and get along with each other, but the Decepticons are the opposite. In direct contrast to the Autobots, the Decepticons are mean to each other. They keep starting fights. They fail constantly because they're selfish and rude and can't cooperate. The Decepticons aren't written as being dysfunctional just because it is funny. It's because it's funny and it subconsciously teaches little kids the value of teamwork and friendship.
If we don't stop Megatron and his bunch, the Earth is doomed.
Starscream and Megatron's relationship in G1 is played up for laughs and obviously shouldn't be taken very seriously. But the important thing here is that this nastiness goes both ways. Starscream is just as mean to Megatron as Megatron is to him. They hate each other so much, and that's how it's always been.
But what does it do, Megatron?
Our clever leader doesn't know what it does.
It's not an imbalance of power, they are awful to each other all the time. The only times where this hasn't been the case are, from my recollection, Spotlight Megatron and Transformers Armada. So when I talk about Transformers Earthspark relying on our knowledge of previous iterations of the character of Starscream and his relationship with Megatron, because it provides no backstory of its own, what other conclusion can we possibly draw from this? Starscream has always instigated the attacks from Megatron. He's always done something to make Megatron want to rip his throat out. This isn't even an issue with the writing anymore. This is the show's entire premise fundamentally damaging the character work they're going for, in an attempt to tell the story of a supposed bad guy being the victim of abuse. Instead, Transformers Earthspark tells us the story of a potentially genocidal maniac who suffered in ways that are not made clear to the audience, while also allowing his abuser to be absolved of all of his crimes with zero consequences. Fantastic. Amazing. Sorry if I'm sounding particularly hysterical about this one, but this shit with Starscream really touches a nerve for me. It's actually wild how badly they managed to screw this one up. And you know what? It gets worse, because you start to realize you don't know a single thing about either side of this conflict, and the Decepticons suffer the most because of it. It should be said that the Decepticons are not the main villains of Earthspark Season 1. I guess they're like antagonists, but not like, you know, villains. The main villain of Earthspark is Ghost itself, and that's like a whole thing I don't think we're covering in this video because it's like fine and it works decently well enough. There's some Decepticons who are just dickheads, but a couple of them are portrayed as not entirely evil and with their own motivations, and that's cool. I like that. By not explaining what the Decepticons did or how badly they hurt the human race, Earthspark is able to attempt stories that try to make you sympathize with characters like Starscream and Megatron and Tarantulas and stuff. That might be fine in a show for babies where you're clearly not meant to take anything particularly seriously, but this is a show that prides itself in telling kids really heavy shit. You can't just not tell us anything about these characters and expect us to feel sympathy for somebody we know did some really horrible stuff. It's like the writers also know how irredeemable Starscream and the other Decepticons might be, and that's why they're just not telling us anything, because they literally cannot justify this. Here's something else. Not all of the Decepticons are completely evil or past redemption. I haven't mentioned Breakdown in this video. He's a Decepticon in the same sort of boat as Tarantulas was during Nightshade's big episode. He's on the run from Ghost because he's scared and he knows they'll treat him like complete shit. But in this show, the Breakdown we see is not a bad guy. Arguably, neither is Tarantulas. When you start to realize that supposedly innocent characters are being hunted down and imprisoned, it raises two big questions, and I'm not sure if these are questions the show wants you to ask or not, because it's not really set up like a moral dilemma. Question 1. What did these two do to warrant being put in jail outside of just being Decepticons? And 2. Why was Megatron the only Decepticon allowed to reintegrate into society? I could understand why characters like Soundwave or his cassettes wouldn't be allowed to, because whenever they break out of jail, they just do crimes. Just like my uncle. But why is it that the only Decepticon who's seemingly been given a second chance is their leader, who we've now established was an abuser to not just his second in command, but possibly his entire army as well?
You should go back to following Megatron. He wouldn't leave anyone behind like that.
Is locking Decepticons in prison while he walks free not leaving us behind?
You might not remember this, but we actually briefly went over this at the start.
When I commanded legions of Decepticons, my strategy was always intimidation.
If Megatron gets a new start and Starscream gets framed as a victim, then what about the other Decepticons? What are they? Are we playing favorites? I get that Starscream was his second in command, but still. The show kind of loops back around to doing the refugee thing again to a lesser extent on the Decepticons. Except it never engages with it in a significant way outside of that whole racist graffiti thing we covered. It tries to have its cake and poop in it too. It wants to show us that not all Decepticons are bad while not answering very basic questions about what being a Decepticon even means. If I'm being fair though, a lot of other Transformers shows don't really cover what the Decepticons' in-depth ideology is either. Of course there are exceptions, but overall Transformers has never really gone into too much detail because it doesn't really need to. I meat ride Transformers Animated all the time on this channel, but outside of some really on-the-nose social commentary, we don't learn much about the Decepticons' manifesto because that's not what the show is about. The difference is that Transformers Earthspark sets itself up like it is about that, or like it wants to be. I keep saying this, but if Earthspark was like Rescue Bots or something, you wouldn't really question this stuff unless you were one of those cartoon reviewers that talk about Postman Pat falling off because you're weird. It's the fact Earthspark takes itself so dead seriously in its way too heavy ideas that your mushy human brain automatically starts picking at the logic. Anyway, speaking of cartoons meant for preschoolers, I want to very quickly touch upon season 2 and 3 of Earthspark again. Everybody's favorite. Starscream in the second season of Earthspark is back to his usual self because nobody wanted to try anymore. Like, agree or disagree with what they did with Starscream in season 1, I think they should have stuck to their guns. Don't Rise of Skywalker this shit, don't be pussies. Somehow Starscream was abused. Starscream in season 2 and 3 is reduced to a bland sock puppet of the classic Starscream tropes with absolutely none of the sauce he had in any previous versions of the character. Everything he does is so wildly inconsistent with what was established in the first season to such an unbelievable degree that I am genuinely convinced none of the new writers knew what show they were being brought into. Even if I didn't like what they did with him in season 1, it was at least interesting. I thought with more time devoted to it, it could have recovered. Like, it would have been a little too late to see what happened to Starscream in the past now. But it would have been an attempt, right? But instead, they walk back the most interesting angle of his character with one line of dialogue where he takes glee in the fact that he's crueler than Megatron because he just murdered 2 children.
You are more cruel than Megatron ever was.
Such compliments in my moment of triumph.
Any moral ambiguity that existed in season 1 regarding the Decepticons is instantly thrown out the window as well. They get no characterization and any nuance that was there is disregarded. I'm only just realizing now that I've hardly mentioned them in this video, but a lot of the one-off Decepticons in Earthspark get a lot of personality in their very brief time on screen in season 1. Like Swindle, I liked Swindle, he was fun, I liked Swindle. But now everybody, even our beloved Swindle, is left in limbo with absolutely nothing to do but act as cannon fodder. The overall point I'm making is that unfortunately, this whole thing with Starscream ended up just being kinda completely pointless. Not just because the show doesn't try to continue this thread in any regard, but because the new writers actively undermine what was set up in season 1. I made a Rise of Skywalker comparison a minute ago because I really feel like my issue with the abuse angle could have been so easily fixed in a later episode to provide us with some context. Man, I've been saying that word a lot today. Are you sick of me saying context yet? Because I'm kind of sick of saying it. I felt the need to bring up the following seasons in this segment just to show how ill-conceived the narrative framing of this show is. This idea of we'll get to it later came back to bite this show in the butt when the show took a sudden creative shift into generic Saturday morning fare that managed to completely undermine everything the first season did with the character. Starscream goes from the character with the most potential going forward to a complete schmuck who feels like a Cliff Notes version of the average Starscream archetype. And with him, the stakes for the entire Decepticon crew evaporate as well. I think this Starscream stuff has definitely frustrated me the most out of everything Earthspark managed to fumble. Or at least it's tied with the Jawbreaker thing. Actually, no, it's more frustrating than the Jawbreaker thing, because at least JB had an episode dedicated to him that felt like it was handled with sincerity and heart in a gentle and progressive way. The handling of Starscream overall is just a complete mess, even removed from season 2 and 3, and I can't even begin to imagine the various meetings that must have taken place to try and justify this creative choice. His entire presence, and by extension, the majority of the Decepticons and their relationship to the wider story of Earthspark, feels Completely wasted. And this isn't just about the Starscream thing anymore. This is about the Nightshade, the Jawbreaker, and the racism thing. I keep seeing people say, I can't believe they dealt with these themes. And it's like, did they? Did they actually engage or deal with any of these ideas? Or did they just address them to give the show a grander sense of importance and to make it seem smarter and more relevant than it actually is? Sorry if this sounds really pointed and accusatory or something, but that's just what it's starting to feel like. The show is starting to feel completely unequipped to deal with its more serious elements, and it's driving me crazy. I've peeled back the layers of this glass onion to such an extent that I'm starting to question the entire format of children's television itself.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant. No! It's just dumb!
I've got a headache, man. Maybe we should take a step back for a moment and talk about all of this stuff that's on my mind real quick. You know what they say? After retreat, courage returns. Which basically means, stop being such a pussy, PaperPlane, and just get on with the damn video. This video's taken so long to write that every time you press a key on the keyboard, dust flies out. Part 5. Why even try? So this is where things start to get even more complicated, kids. Not because the show did something wrong again, but because I'm facing my own little moral dilemma, and I hope you can be a bunch of therapists and help me out. I feel really torn about something, and I feel the need to dedicate an entire section of this video to this feeling so I can clear my mind before we wrap things up. Hopefully this won't take long, don't worry. We'll get silly again in a minute. I've been yapping this whole time about Earthspark not telling the audience really vital information that heavy subjects like abuse and racism need to actually work. I've made that very clear over the last hour. The thing I've been trying to understand is if this is the fault of the writers or the fault of Transformers Earthspark's format as a show for the youngins. And what's tearing me apart is the fact that one half of me is wondering why you'd even bother trying to put these things in a cartoon if you know you won't be able to give it the room it needs to breathe. But the other half of me is wondering if the concept of asking the writers to stay in their lane and just write a normal action cartoon is like anti-art or something. Like pushing boundaries with kids' cartoons is how we got such revered shows like Over the Garden Wall, Batman the Animated Series, Adventure Time, Justice League, Avatar The Last Airbender, Gravity Falls, Clone Wars, Steven Universe, and Chop Socky Chooks. Kids are way smarter than people give them credit for. I think I've made a few jokes on this channel about kids being dumb or whatever, but that is bupkiss. That was merely in jest. Kids can totally handle tough subjects and complex ideas in their fiction if they're presented in a strong enough context. But what Earthspark wants kids to feel is often at odds with what they're actually saying. People love to talk about how Earthspark fell off with tackling its major themes past the first season, how the new writers they brought in had a completely different set of goals when it came to writing this show. And while that is true, pretending that the show perfectly handled its complex ideas in the first place does it no favors. The ideas I've been yammering on about, while pretty daring for a kid's show to tackle, were not handled in a way that I felt was particularly thoughtful or consistent or entirely respectful. I think it definitely deserves praise for trying at the very least. It tried to do something different and it tried to say something. Ambition keeps anything interesting, and this was definitely an ambitious move, I'll give it that. But ambition, when misplaced, becomes its worst enemy. Like if I performed a three-pointer with a live grenade through an open window into the gout ward at the hospital, that'd be like pretty bold, right? Bet you've never seen anybody do something like that before. I'm doing something different, but I don't know if that would entirely work out. I probably didn't think that through because the explosion caused everybody to get gout. I didn't even know gout was contagious. I'm gonna pull an example out of my ass real quick to make my point. Recently, my friend showed me the cartoon Tron Uprising. I'm not a big Tron guy, but I like the first two movies. I think the bikes are cool, and I like it when Jeff Bridges says, yeah. That being said, I really liked this Tron Uprising cartoon. It looks really cool, it's fun, the characters are interesting, and it's got major aura. It was pretty good. But what really took me by surprise with Tron Uprising was how this show meant for ages 8 and up was able to effectively tackle really heavy ideas in a way that didn't talk down to kids or downplay any of the characters' feelings or arcs. It was able to talk about things like why and how people get indoctrinated into both sides of a conflict, and the idea of the one versus the many in a way that felt genuine and real. Of course, it tells this story in a very for everyone way, just like Earthspark tries to, but the key difference is that it actually works most of the time. I know, right? crazy. It doesn't try to squeeze complex ideas into just one episode alone or provide easy solutions to these problems. It allows them to carry through the show so we can see how these things shape the characters and the world they inhabit. Outside of this show looking great and being really fun and exciting, it's also able to push the programming category to its limit to tell a really interesting story. It doesn't shy away from the darker side of the human condition while also being a fun action cartoon for kids. And obviously, Tron Uprising and Transformers Earthspark are two very different shows with two very different goals. But they're both kids shows that try to communicate complex ideas to their audience of crayon-sucking rugrats. Tron Uprising isn't perfect. It's like a high 7, low 8 out of 10, but it respects its audience enough to not only mention these ideas, but thoroughly engage with them. It builds its world around its themes. The fascist regime controlling the population's every action and punishing those who don't conform isn't a footnote or an implication, it's front and center. On the contrary, as we've seen, Earthspark will come close to making a point, but time and time again, it's able to fumble its own themes because the show can't sit with anything for long enough to allow it to have the impact it should have. And sure, a lot of Earthspark's ideas are built around the primary theme of identity, but the difference between that and something like Tron Uprising is that this central theme which looms over everything is not always explored in a way that ties into the world these characters inhabit, or the characters themselves. It might say something deep or profound occasionally, but they really don't change or challenge our characters in any significant way. Kids want to be taken seriously. They want to feel like an adult before they actually grow into one and learn how miserable it is to be one. That's why kids media that treats its audience with intelligence and respect is so important. The best and most revered kids cartoons are the ones that don't treat kids like they're too fragile to understand difficult topics. The ones that guide kids through these complex ideas without cushioning every emotional blow. When a show like Transformers Earthspark dodges that responsibility, it not only misses an opportunity to meaningfully reach the kids at home, but it also manages to accidentally teach kids that difficult situations and feelings are easy to solve and find answers to. So no, I don't think the creators behind Transformers Earthspark shouldn't have even tried. Like I said, I do appreciate them for having a go. I'm sure these things were very important to Maycat and Nicole Dubach and all the other writers that worked on this. I'm certain of it, actually. I feel with quite a lot of confidence that nobody in the writer's room would intentionally make something this disrespectful and purposefully try to disguise it as progressive. I also feel as if the writers truly believed that what they had written was correct and morally justified. And I'm sure to at least one of them, they can explain why this is all okay and fine and not controversial. Maybe the problem isn't Earthspark's writers or the fact it's restricted to being a kids show. I think it might just be how ambitious it is with writers who, while probably way smarter and more competent than me, are either mostly new to the industry or write shows for preschoolers. I'm not calling out anybody specifically, I'm just saying. I did think it was kind of weird how the series Bible at no point divulges the fact the show would start tackling serious and heavy topics and instead only seemed to concern itself with how funny the show would be. I don't know, it just kind of makes it seem like the show began life as a light-hearted comedy, but maybe somebody from Hasbro or Nick stepped in and forced the show to become something more action-oriented to target a slightly older crowd. Like the first batch of episodes are all pretty silly and stuff until Maycat was brought in as a staff writer at episode 11. Why was she suddenly brought on board almost halfway through series 1 just when Earthspark's crazy big ideas start kicking off? Did they get her in just because she is more experienced with action cartoons? I said at the start of this video that the first 8 or so episodes of Earthspark are pretty tame, so that the more serious stuff that comes later is particularly shocking and shows how far our cast has come. But now I'm starting to wonder if this was actually because of a major shift of direction and it wasn't actually on the cards in the first place. It would kind of explain why some things in the earlier episodes start to feel kind of weird in context later on, right?
They did not deserve a lifetime of gay sex.
You forget your oath, Megatron.
Sorry for getting carried away with the conspiracy there. I kind of just pulled that out of my ass based on not much evidence to make a completely unfounded claim about Earthspark's production history. I'm probably crazy. Don't take what I just said as fact unless you're just as conspiracy pilled as I am. Maybe I'm just trying to cope with how torn between visions Earthspark is, I don't know. The point is, Transformers Earthspark can be really fun and nice and wholesome, but it also wants to say something and matter. Like it's not content with just being cutesy slice of life adventures, which is either really brave or really bogus. I haven't decided yet. The show's struggles to say important things isn't a problem with the format or the genre or whatever. It falls entirely on something occurring with this production. Whether that's writers, execs, I don't know. I'm not sure when we'll know, but someday we'll know something, and when we do, there's nothing wrong with ambition, but sometimes just having good intentions isn't enough. And that might be kind of mean, but I'm sorry, it's true. Wanting to say something means nothing when you don't actually say it. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, Earthspark just doesn't say much about anything. And that's pretty sad and bad. And it makes me mad. Only a tad. Oh well. In conclusion, watch Tron Uprising. Hey Jeff Bridges, should all the kids at home watch Tron Uprising?
Yeah.
Cool. What about Transformers Earthspark?
Yeah.
Wow. Just so they can form their own opinions, right?
Yeah.
That's so wise of you, Jeff.
Yeah.
He's so cool. Hey, what about season 2 and 3, Jeff? Should we watch those too?
You've done enough already! You're messing with my Zen thing, man.
Part 6. Wha Happen? We're almost done here, which makes me sad because I've really enjoyed our time together. We spent a whole load of time talking about Earthspark's lows and very little time talking about its highs, which is unfortunate because its highs are pretty cool. Amongst Transformers fans, it's still a pretty popular show. At least, season 1 is. It's not quite Transformers Prime levels of rabid fandom, but like, nothing could ever be that crazy. But season 1 is not the whole picture. Every time anyone says anything remotely positive about this show, they have to clarify they're talking about season 1 alone. I mentioned this at the start of the video, but the biggest reason I didn't want to talk about season 2 and 3 of Earthspark in this video is because I don't really like them very much. They made me feel nothing but a hollow emptiness, the likes of which I haven't felt since I flew that helicopter for my buddy John Landis. But I do want to touch upon season 2 and 3 a little bit to provide some further context for my big epic finale. Also, I've been beating around the bush with the topic of what's going on there, and I figured we could all do with a little laugh before we wrap things up. I'm not spending much time on it because I'll get pretty upset if I start going into the deets of everything, and you don't want to see me when I'm mildly upset about a show for children.
I got a DVD of the shitty show from Goodwill, and I remember destroying the shit out of it.
As you've either heard or been able to pick up on, a whole load of Earthspark's creative team got shown the door for season 2. That included showrunner Nicole Dubuc, the wonderful May Cat, and a whole load of staff writers and directors. We don't have the full story for why this happened, but the point is, Earthspark became a completely different show under this new team, and for sure, a much worse one. I'm not saying these are bad writers or bad directors, I'm sure they're very talented and accomplished. I'm just saying, the show's not as good now. It's pretty awful, actually. Sometimes it's actually borderline unwatchable. Anything remotely positive you can say about season 1 does not carry over into season 2, minus the voice acting, I guess. I touched on this a little earlier, but almost all of the characters either act wildly different to how they were before, or their arcs have been completely reset. Even worse, some just don't have any character anymore. Especially Nightshade. The new characters are lame and forgettable, except for Cosmos. He's nice, although I think that's carried by the fact he's voiced by Weird Al for some reason.
Hey, I'm Cosmos.
The worst of all though is Prowl, who somehow goes through the same arc 3 times over the course of a season and is generally just a major drag whenever he shows up on screen. Like, I can't imagine a single kid watching this and thinking Prowl is awesome or cool or wanting a toy of him. I know I wouldn't have, and I loved Cops when I was a kid, but that's only because my dad forced me to watch a load of police body cam shows when I was like 10 years old to try and condition me for my future as the most wanted man in the world. It is kind of hard to talk about season 2 and 3 in relation to series 1 because of how much it strays from everything it did, but I think there's some episodes that are like okay on their own. There's one where Twitch gets cloned and I didn't think that one was too bad. It's almost fun. Imagine that. Though that's probably because I just like Twitch a lot. I don't know. I just realized I haven't mentioned Twitch in this video since like part 2. I'm really sorry, Twitch. I hope you find justice in another continuity that isn't complete dookie. But overall, most of this show is written like a cartoon for toddlers, which is fine. It's just not a very good cartoon for toddlers. I really vibe with Transformers Rescue Bots, which is also a cartoon for little babies, because the characters are cute and fun to watch, and it also makes me laugh. It's weird that Earthspark is trying to be a show for babies when the first season was aiming for the 9 to 12-year-old crowd. Unless, like, these new writers think that this is the sort of thing that 9 to 12-year-olds like, in which case, oops. At the time of writing this video, it is August 2025, and Earthspark is still ongoing. Maybe a lot of its issues could be magically fixed by its 4th season, but at this time, we don't know exactly what's going on with this show. Apparently there's gonna be like A movie? I can barely tolerate 20 minutes of this crap. Don't make me watch a whole hour of it. I'm gonna get psittacosis listening to these kids parrot on about family. As well as a completely different writing staff, Earthspark's entire animation team was overhauled. The animation for the next 2 seasons was handled by 88 Pictures, most famous for animating that one bun-ass Megamind sequel and also stealing from a Star Wars fan film. Like I said way back at the start, it's really easy to dunk on the later seasons for looking like something you'd watch in a dentist's office. But there's a good reason for that. Michael Launder, the CG supervisor for this show, wrote a whole thread on Twitter on why this show looks like this now.
Hasbro and Nick decided to switch to a new studio as the mental health and well-being of Icon and the Nick team was suffering during Season 1. By switching studios, you can think of Season 2 really as another Season 1. The animators have never worked with the characters before. Sure, they have reference, but pipelines and tools for animation have to be rebuilt and recoded. However, after visiting and meeting a large amount myself, that says nothing of their passion and hard work. This season may look kinda jank, but I'm as proud of the worst moment as the best moment from Season 1. I can say without a doubt that the whole team is happier, less stressed, and closer together for these episodes. That's worth more than any production value to me. Heart emoji.
That's all well and good, and it's nice that the employees' mental health is being prioritized here, but we're gonna talk about the animation anyway, because it looks really bad. It'd be so easy to point out all the janky movement, twitching limbs, weirdly timed keyframes, flat lighting, scary faces, Half-Life looking textures, messed up liquid sims, poor blocking, continuity errors, and bizarre physics all day long. I could do that if you wanted. It's honestly embarrassing to watch. The sort of thing where you have to peer through your fingers at it because you can't believe what you're seeing. Honestly though, while I could fill up another 3 hours of video just talking about this stuff, I want to spend this time talking about one of the strangest animation errors I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this happen before, and I'd like to share it with the class because of how bizarre it is. There's this one episode where Prowl, Robbie, and that stupid ass bike are looking for a Quintesson spy, and the whole episode is kind of grey and gloomy just cuz. Here's the thing, for some reason, whenever the camera is at a relatively low angle looking up at the characters, their colors begin to fade from their bodies. Look at Prowl's crest here, right? You see that? Weird, right? Watch it again. Look close. It goes from red to black, right? Look at Bumblebee's Autobot logo here. It's usually red and it's black here because we're looking up at him. Look at this. Look at how Thrasher's colors fade out when he runs closer. It's weird. I have never seen anything like this before. Have you? That's odd, right? It's kind of really noticeable and strange. Like, what could have possibly gone wrong here to allow this to happen? This bothered me so much that I asked the name brand company what's going on here, and he sent me a reasonable explanation that I will now play for you while I go have a quick cigarette.
So there's this concept in 3D animation that's known as ambient occlusion, which is the idea that as 2 objects get closer together, that area sort of becomes darker. This can be used in 3D software to create different types of edgeware textures. Edgeware is when the corners of an object appear to be weathered down. In the case of something like a metal object with Transformers, that would be the paint sort of being scuffed and the metal underneath being shown just a little bit. I would suspect that was sort of a similar process that they did with Transformers Earthspark, but I can't be 100% sure. You can notice in this one image of Prowl where the corners appear a little bit darker than the rest of it. That's kind of a common effect of that little cheat in creating edgeware effects. The problem with doing this for your edgeware is that the ambient occlusion can change based on the angle of the model. So every once in a while, the colors will sort of adjust drastically and you'll see pretty much the entire underlying texture that is supposed to just be on the corners. So when you look at this clip of Prowl stepping forward, you can see what I would suspect is the ambient occlusion adjusting to the point where the underlying paint is just being revealed. This is just my 2 guesses. I only had like a minute and a half, 2 minutes to say all this.
All right, man. All right. That's enough out of you. Quiet. Shut up. Namebrand's nice, but he's like more of a yapper than I am, and like it's becoming a real problem. And like I want to have him in more videos, but he just keeps talking. While it's fun to point and laugh at all this stuff regarding season 2 and 3 in retrospect, it honestly does make season 1 look both better and worse at the same time. Better because the overall production is really shoddy and it makes season 1 look like Castle in the Sky. But it also makes it look worse because of just how much season 2 throws out and refuses to engage with anything the first season did, to such an extent hint that it makes season 1 look bad for not fully exploring the majority of its big ideas like I've been saying this whole time. And that's a damn shame. Ages ago, I said that if the show had begun life like this, I don't think people would be as upset as they are. Even if it never 100% worked, once you show the audience what they could have, it's really hard to settle for less. Earthspark Season 1 is messy and weird, but I'd take 10 more seasons of Earthspark trying than just one more season of whatever the hell this is. You wanna know why I never made a huge video talking about the War for Cybertron trilogy? It's because I don't like it and I don't care. I don't want to devote a huge chunk of my time to something I really didn't like, because I don't think the video would turn out very good for either of us. I'd probably be like, blindly complaining the whole time. It wouldn't be fun to make or watch. The whole reason this video was made in the first place was because I truly did care about Earthspark. It made me feel something. It reached me. I know I spent a long time yapping about all of its problems, but that's only because I care. You think I only complain because I'm miserable? Okay, well maybe I am miserable. But I complain because I like Transformers and I sometimes like this show. This whole video started life as a complete series retrospective, seasons 2 and 3 included within the main bulk of the video. But as I was writing it, I just realized I just kept repeating myself over and over and over when it came to the later seasons. And then I realized that my stance on the overall story and plotting of season 1's arc is that it's just functional. It works. But it's not interesting enough to make a video about it. Like, the ending is pretty satisfying despite the majority of the cast having nothing to do. Mandroid turns all the Autobots evil and Twitch completes her arc where she grows into the leader of the Terrans. They convince the Decepticons to fight alongside them even though they really have no skin in this game. Like, it makes sense for Starscream to show up since he made friends with Hashtag, but it just felt kind of weird to have the rest of the Decepticons wage their battle to destroy the evil forces of the Autobots. But it's okay. It's a satisfying enough conclusion that makes you go, yeah, that was cool. But anyway, what really interested me were this show's attempts at tackling big ideas and how it fumbles almost every single thing it tries to say. Which is ironic because the attempts at tackling these nuanced ideas is what people love this show for. I didn't want to make this video to show it to Earthspark fans or rub it in their face like, aha, your show was never good actually. I just felt that the way this show explores emotional complexity is sometimes really immature and ill-informed, and that should be acknowledged if you're going to be singing its praises. It's a show that I will watch if it's on the box because I do genuinely like a lot of things about it. But my problems with it bother me so much I had to stop taking my risperidone so I could make a big video about it for my audience of very awesome and epic people. Transformers Earthspark is not some misunderstood masterpiece, and it's not a disaster that needs to be taken out back and shot. It is a fine kids cartoon that gets a few things very, very, very wrong. And I think that's why it's tortured me for so long, why I'm so bothered by it. It's one of the first Transformers shows in a long while that tries to do something crazy in its field. And that's not to say that Cyberverse or the War for Cybertron trilogy didn't try, but Cyberverse was mostly just silly fun that didn't take itself very seriously, and War for Cybertron was aiming for an older crowd. Earthspark is a Transformers show for kids that tries to teach them things beyond not playing in the street or walking in on mom and dad when they hear them wrestling in the bedroom. And like I've said, I think that's worthy of praise. But I think overall, the tonal whiplash, lack of commitment, and the almost performative nature of its heavy ideas really bring it down. One half of this show is Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and it's pretty good at being Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. But the other half is trying to be sensei, and it's not very good at being sensei. I'm sure that could work in like a better show, but it really doesn't come together here at all. I've never really spoken about stuff this deep on the channel before, and I probably won't ever again. But when you talk about Earthspark, it's kinda unavoidable. The show is a self-perpetuating discourse machine, and I don't think anyone's ever gonna be fully happy with it one way or the other. I truly do believe the show was in a better place when it wasn't trying to be deep. When it was a cute slice-of-life cartoon, it really worked. Those first 8 or so episodes of silly Transformer antics were such a genuine breath of fresh air. You got to hang out with these characters and watch them fail in small, stupid ways that work when it's treated like everyday nonsense instead of the prelude to some grand thematic statement. What I'm saying is, and this might be controversial, Transformers Earthspark had a better grasp on and a stronger sense of its own identity before it tried to say anything about the world we live in. It felt more confident in itself. It felt like it knew exactly what it wanted to be. The less heavy its topics were, the more well-equipped the show felt in handling them. To me, that shows that Earthspark didn't fail because it aimed for the stars and landed in the sun. It failed because it forgot what it had in the first place back on Earth. It's like a little metaphor I did there. I hope you liked it. I felt really smart writing that one. Early Earthspark wasn't trying to convince you that what you were watching was important. It was just letting itself be important in its own smaller scale way. It had heart, charm, personality, and an identity that felt fresh for the Transformers franchise at large. And for some reason, somewhere along the way, it traded that in for something that was unsure of itself. Something that wanted to sound important. Something that was way too big for its boots. It didn't lose its heart. It lost trust in the simple slice of life version of itself being able to speak to kids. And that's sad. I think the biggest lesson to be learned from this show is that regardless of intention, ambition without follow-through becomes performative and hollow. Earthspark is not too deep. It's too ambitious without being thorough. But was it worth trying? I'm probably not the one who should be answering that question, so I'm gonna leave it up to you guys. That's right, I'm leaving this open for discussion because I'm a hack who can't write endings. So yeah, that's everything I got. I've been trying not to develop a parasocial relationship with a kids show, but I think I failed miserably. It's definitely one of the strangest viewing experiences I've ever had. Not the best, not the worst, just weird. And you know what? If Season 4 is some kind of surprise gem, some kind of masterpiece that fixes the errors of not just Season 2 and 3 but also Season 1, well, you know where to find me. Okay, never mind, it just came out. It is abysmal dog shit.